Good morning, everyone. Good morning. Thank you all for coming today. Hopefully you found the breakfast over here, and please help yourself anytime during the presentations. And restrooms are down that hallway. And just feel free to get up anytime. We got a lot of information to cover today. So we do want you to visit all the vendor booths. After the presentation, we'll be doing drawings for fabulous prizes. So you will all want to make sure that you have dropped your business card, or there's slips of paper there that you can drop in to each vendor. So I just want to make sure you do that. If you're sitting in a chair and you need a clipboard, there are clipboards up at the front desk, because you obviously won't have something to write on. So I'd like to introduce Brett Rohr. Brett is with Arizona Tuition Organization, and he's going to open us up in prayer.
Let's pray. Dear Lord, we thank you for this day. We thank you for blessing us so much with relationships, old friends, new friends. We thank you for Monica and her team for bringing us together today, and we've asked for open hearts and open minds so that we can represent our organizations the best we can to those in our world and those outside our world. Again, thank you for all of your blessings. Through Jesus' name, amen.
Amen. Thank you, Brett. Okay, we are going to skip the first slides in the legal presentation, and we are going to go right to the next presentation. And then we'll back up again, so don't be confused. Okay, there we go. And I'm going to introduce Bob Brown of the Church and Ministry Law Tax Group, Legal Group. Let me slow down there, Bob. We've been doing this so many years, you think I would be able to say that easily. But anyway, this is Bob Brown.
Good morning, everybody. Thanks so much for coming. It always feels like old home week. There's so many friends and acquaintances that we've worked with over the years. It's just great to see you all. So this morning we'll have three elements in the legal presentation. The first element will be by John Rublid, who is also our nonprofit tax attorney and specialist, as well as having experience in intellectual property law and employment law. John has been representing churches and other charitable organizations for almost 30 years, a graduate of Dallas Theological Seminary with a Master of Theology, and a graduate of the University of Minnesota Law School. He really brings a very practical approach to his practice, and we are just delighted to have him as part of the team. If you would, please welcome John Rublid.
I get to start my day talking to people that care about nonprofit tax. Like, it cannot get any better than this. Like, you are my tribe. All right, so we're going to start out talking. So I'm just going to talk about 5 or 6 kind of current legal issues that I think are of interest and need for you to have some information on. And the first one is the political activity prohibition on churches. And there's a current case that was filed in the Eastern District of Texas, and it was filed by the National Religious Broadcasters as a lead plaintiff to seek to overturn this prohibition on political activity by churches. This was first instituted into the tax code in 1954 by then Congressman Lyndon Johnson. And so it's called the Johnson Amendment, which says that 501c3 organizations are prohibited from engaging in political activity. So let me first distinguish political activity from what's called legislative activity, right? Legislative or lobbying activity. Political activity is essentially the support or opposition of a candidate for political office. So a 501c3 is prohibited by the Johnson Amendment from endorsing a political candidate. And that can be a city council person, or it can be president of the United States. Any candidate for political office, prohibited from using resources, personnel, a pastor getting up and saying, or a executive director getting up and saying that they support or oppose a candidate for office. Legislative activity is the support or opposition of a piece of legislation. And that can be a municipal code amendment, or it can be congressional action in D.C. So it's a limitation on legislative activity, not a prohibition. So political is prohibition, legislative is a limitation. It can not be more than insubstantial. And insubstantial in the practicalities of it is kind of confusing, but it is somewhere around 15% of your overall effort, time, resources, money of a 501c3 organization. And so that is, when you're just going by the insubstantial test, then what the IRS can include in an analyzing whether you went more than insubstantial, they can analyze if you got a bunch of volunteers together and sent them to the Capitol to support, protest, talk to lawmakers. Those volunteer hours and efforts count toward your substantial efforts or insubstantial efforts. There's also what's called a 501h election, which then measures your activity just by a dollar amount. So if your total revenue by your 501c3 is $1 million, then you may be limited to no more than $200,000, or there's a limitation on the dollar amount, so it's limited to the spend. It's much easier to measure. So I just want to give you those two, an understanding that there's a difference. What we're talking about in this case is the political prohibition, support or opposition of a candidate for office. And so what National Religious Broadcasters, and there's actually 4 parties to this lawsuit, National Religious Broadcasters, Sand Springs Church, First Baptist Church, Wascom, Texas, and the Intercessors for America. And this was filed in the Eastern District of Texas. And what the IRS has agreed to is the entry of a consent judgment, which is basically all the parties agreeing to say, we're going to settle this by this judgment. And the consent judgment says that churches can engage in political activity in the normal course of a church talking to its congregants. And so that consent judgment is basically the IRS is saying this has been our interpretation of the Johnson Amendment as it applies to churches. It hasn't been a complete prohibition on churches. It's been a prohibition outside of normal church communications. And so the mindset of this consent judgment is that church is like a family. You're not prohibited from talking to your family about politics. It may not be wise. It may not make for a good Thanksgiving, right? But that church family, in talking to that church family, then they're okay in talking about support or opposition for a candidate for office, which is kind of that's how it's been practically applied. But for there to actually be a court decision about with these parties, or a consent judgment would be a public record about that position by the IRS. President Trump issued an executive order asking the IRS not to enforce this against churches. So it's kind of been the playing field has been, this is changing. So what this consent judgment is saying is that this is not a reinterpretation. This is not a elimination of the Johnson Amendment. This is the best reading of the Johnson Amendment. Right? The consent judgment actually says it's based on the statutory text. It's the best reading based on the statutory text, settled interpretive principles, and the IRS's longstanding practices, that the Johnson Amendment does not reach a narrow category of speech. In other words, speech by a house of worship to its congregation in connection with religious services through its customary channels of communication on matters of faith concerning electoral politics viewed through the lens of religious faith. That's the language in the consent judgment. There's a lot there. We're not going to unpack it today, but it's really talking about when a church in its services, talking to its worshipers, and talking about politics in the context of faith, they can communicate about support or opposition of a candidate for office. Now, this consented judgment will only apply to these parties, okay? So when this consent judgment, we'll see how it plays out. If this is entered, then it doesn't mean that you're now all free to do it. It does tell you the IRS is not going to enforce it, but the IRS needs to give us guidance. So that's kind of on the IRS's work list, is that they're going to create guidance around this as this changes, because I think it will change. There's a hearing on the consent judgment November 7th, and so that will be a decision. What's happened is that there's been a couple of groups that have made a motion to intervene in the lawsuit. So, for example, the Americans United for Separation of Church and State, they filed a motion to intervene and become a party. So, because they're like, if the IRS isn't going to argue what the tax code says, we'll argue for what the tax code says, that there's a prohibition for churches to do this. And there's a couple other groups, Campaign Legal Center, Common Cause. And so there's a motion about the consent judgment. Americans United for Separation of Church and State will get time to argue their position about why they should be a party, and then there will be there may be a later hearing if they're allowed by the judge to become a party, right? So that's lots of information about that, but I just want you to know there have been a couple of news reports that said, okay, churches can now, right? They're released, they're not subject to the political activity prohibition, and that's not true, right? It still applies. This is not getting rid of the Johnson Amendment or the prohibition for 501c3s. It is just recognizing, according to the court, that the Johnson Amendment was not intended to take away this time that a church may have to talk to its congregations as family about these issues. That was never intended to be covered by the Johnson Amendment, is their interpretation. So a couple things about that. So it's required guidance by the IRS, but there's lots of questions, right? Like, when is the church acting like a family, right? And what are its congregants? Like, who are Joel Osteen's congregants? Like, is it when this gets broadcast? You know, when there are leaders with a big following, you know, that seems beyond what they're saying was intended. You know, so they need to give us guidance on that. You know, but then you have to think about, okay, think about your church is now going to be, people are going to lean into the pastor as like, you need to get up there and support this candidate. You need to oppose this candidate. So it's going to create some challenges for you. You're going to be pressured to support or oppose candidates, right? Is this good? Is this what you want? Like, so your church is going to have to think through what those issues are, because then, you know, people are going to choose a church based on who they supported for political office, right? Isn't that the world we live in? Lots of it, lots of pieces to this. I will say this: we're not at the point where we're saying go amend your articles to remove, you know, because your articles of incorporation say you're not going to engage in any political activity. Okay. So that's still true a lot of the time, right? But so there may be a tweak to your article. We're not going to get rid of the political prohibition, but it may be something like we're not engage in political activity as provided by law, right? Or engage in political activity within the church, worship services. So there'll be a tweak to it, but we're not going to eliminate that or amend your articles to get rid of that, right? So this petition the hearing on the petition on the entry of the consent judgment is November 7th. Interesting enough, all the lawyers and a lot of the plaintiffs, or half the plaintiffs, have offices in Washington, D.C., so they actually moved the hearing from East Texas to Washington, D.C. So, interesting world we live in. Okay, you may have some questions about that, but I just want to take a time to make sure we understand what that litigation is about, and the fact that the prohibition hasn't been eliminated yet. They're interpreting the Johnson Amendment when it comes to this piece for churches. Okay. School. There's some schools in here, and some of your churches have schools. You support schools. And so you've known that for years, ever since the Bob Jones case in the mid-'70s, you've had to have a non-discrimination statement that you put on your website, or there's rules about how you make that publicly available. And so that has been part of this Revenue Procedure 7550. And then you have to track, ethnicity or race of students that you have. If you file a 990, you provide that information. That all came out of this Bob Jones University case. So some of you, let me give you a brief on that. Bob Jones University had a prohibition on interracial dating from its formation date up through the early 70s. And so they were challenged, and they lost their tax-exempt status for a period of 3 years because it went to the Supreme Court. The court found that that was against public policy to have that kind of a racial discrimination policy and practice. And so the Supreme Court ruling, then the IRS took that and created this Rev Proc 7550 that laid out all these requirements for an educational institution to maintain 501c3 status and comply with public policy around racial practices. So, as many of you may know, there was a Harvard case, students for fair admission against Harvard. There was another one against University of North Carolina. And the Supreme Court ruled that race-based affirmative action policies in college admissions were unconstitutional, right? Under the Equal Protection Act, Title VII. And so the Supreme Court struck down race-based admission policies. And so the ruling found that Harvard's admissions policy lacked clear objectives. They negatively used race because the students who filed the lawsuit were Asian American, who had been discriminated against because they were Asian American. Right? The policies had no definitive endpoint, this court said, and it prohibited the consideration of race as a factor in admission decisions. So now it looks like it's on the work list for the IRS to either get rid of Rev Proc 7550 or to change it in a way that may be less, I don't want to use the term, I will use the term onerous or impactful on how you track things, because there are things that we don't necessarily need to track, right? And that's what the Supreme Court said. So understand that may be coming down for you if you have a school, or your kids go to a school, or your church runs a school, that there may be a change to this whole approach with IRS. To maintain IRS tax-exempt status, you have to maintain these records and policies and practices specifically targeted at race. So this was an interesting, I went and heard this oral argument on this case, Childs v. Salazar. And It's a case out of Colorado. Colorado has a law against what is known as conversion therapy. It says that a licensed counselor, psychiatrist, professional, mental health person, professional, a licensed person is prohibited from seeking to address conversion of somebody's sexual orientation, gender identity. They're prohibited from talking to minors about that in their counseling. And so this was challenged. The law had an exemption for church. It had an exclusion for churches providing counseling around religious ministries, and so the religious ministry counselors are not licensed, so they don't fall under the licensure requirement, but they specifically stated they were excluded. So this minor conversion therapy law prohibits mental health professionals from providing this therapy to minors. So it's challenged, right? A lawsuit was filed, and the question is this prohibition, is the law an infringement on free speech, right? Or is it a regulating professional conduct? The Colorado Attorney General is arguing that it's regulating professional conduct, that it is unprofessional conduct to try to convert somebody who has identified in a certain way. So it's unprofessional, so that person should not have a license. And that's all Colorado is doing, he's saying, is regulating professional conduct, right? The opposing side argued that it's an infringement on free speech. This person's exercising their beliefs and speaking as to what they think is professional and what they think is good therapy would be to talk to minors about these kind of life issues and impact in a different way and not convert. And so it was a hearing at the Supreme Court, so it's under decision. A lot of the engagement with the justices looked like it was leaning toward being a free speech issue, and so we'll see how that's decided. There are other states that have these laws, and I think there has been a push to increase the adoption of these type of laws. So this Supreme Court case will just make a decision about whether those are acceptable or not. All right. Catholic Charities Bureau. We talked about this a little bit last year. This was a case in Wisconsin where the Catholic Charities, who provides food, clothing, some shelter, services, is owned by the Catholic Church, but they were denied an exemption from unemployment tax because they were not engaging in religious activity, is what the Wisconsin court said, meaning they said that what a person, there are secular organizations who do what they do, and they don't need to be religious, plus the Catholic Charities did not do anything to try to share their faith or imbue their faith, is what the court said. And so the court made a decision about what is religious activity. So this went to the Supreme Court, and so the question is, what is religious activity? What is a religious organization? We didn't get a great answer from the court. What we got from the court was that that Wisconsin could not basically select one religious and their organization and their practices over another religious organization and its practices when the organization was doing it with religious incentives, faith. They were doing it out of their faith, and the Supreme Court said that should be sufficient for saying you can't discriminate just because their practices may not be what you think religious organization practices are. So it's very protective of a religious organization and a scope of activity by a religious organization. Now, this is important, really important, because let's take Hope in the Future, right? They're doing transitional living. This is the free paid advertisement. They're doing, yes, there they are. They're doing, transitional living. They're giving people a place, to age out of the foster care, to get stability, to get embedded in their faith, to grow. Well, there are secular organizations that do that, right? And there are secular organizations that do it without any kind of faith component. So it's really important that we have an understanding of what a religious organization is. And I'm not sure we have a clear one, but let me talk about it a little bit. So for example, we have the IRS 14-factor test, right? But that was back when the IRS was looking at like the Episcopal Church or something where they had their own seminaries, they had their own ministers, they had this very formal type of approach, and many of us go to attend churches that are Bible churches or are more independent, and so you don't have all those kind of factors. So it's kind of a guess game. What are the most important factors? And then a piece that's adding to this complication is, and I think Monty's going to talk about this. This whole 508, 501c3. What is a church? But there are organizations that, for example, Focus on the Family. Focus on the Family filed a request for reclassification, and they became a church. Okay, now, none of us look necessarily at Focus on the Family and think they're a church, right? Well, what is the church? Well, the church is people, right? And then Cody and I have done a couple of them this year where we've done reclassifications to a church. So let me give you this guidance. There are the World Vision case in 2011. The World Vision case, the question was, because World Vision in 2011, they were sued by 3 employees who were terminated because they no longer agreed with the statement of faith of World Vision, right? Remember this case? And it had to do with Title VII, what is a religious organization for purposes of Title VII? And the plaintiffs argued World Vision is a relief organization, right? They're not a religious organization. They're just doing relief, just like a lot of other organizations do relief. And the court ruled that World Vision was a religious organization because clearly in their articles of incorporation and bylaws and on their website, they talked about their religious motivation for what they were doing. They had a statement of faith that they required not only key employees, which would be sufficient in many cases, but they required all employees to agree with that statement of faith. So the organization had a statement of faith, right? And it applied it, it practiced it, right? And so those are kind of the key foundational principles for determining what is a religious organization. And I think that's as much guidance we have now through World Vision. All right. So the court said religious organizations do not lose their religious identity or exemptions merely because they engage in non-traditional religious services. They were motivated for their actions based on their faith with a clear religious mission. So these are the things out of Spencer v. World Vision. It was formed for religious purposes. It's engaged primarily in carrying out that religious purpose. Holds itself out to the public as an entity carrying out a religious purpose. And doesn't engage primarily in the exchange of goods or services for money beyond nominal compensation consideration. So those were the key factors of what is a religious organization. And I'll just tell you, I just reviewed the articles. We're doing a legal structure thing for a mission in Florida. And it's 100+ years old, religious organization. They hire based on religion. And there is nothing in their articles or bylaws about being a religious organization. So we're going to change that, right? So that's where you start. Is it a religious corporation? I just want to mention this. You may have seen, for those of you who are certified by Evangelical Council Financial Accountability, they have a new leader care standard. And so your first glance is, okay, I thought they were about financial integrity and accounting and those kind of things, right? And now they're saying every organization's board and senior leader work together to develop a care plan for the senior leader. The plan shall be approved annually by the board to demonstrate the organization's commitment to caring proactively for the leader's well-being and integrity. And the tie that ECFA makes to financial integrity and accountability is that they're seeing the experience of too many ministries with leader burnout, dropout, tragic breaches of trust, and integrity failures, which are all negative on a gospel witness. And so they see this as a standard that will help that leader not decide to do something, be a bad actor when it comes to finances, or to act with integrity, or to do their job as opposed to just disappear on the organization. Last thing I wanted to mention was this executive order on debanking. There were some organizations, there were a number of Second Amendment type organizations who were, there were policies and practices adopted by a bank where they were, they were told by the bank that they can't, they can no longer serve them because they're too much of a risk. There were some religious organizations. The religious organizations are kind of interesting to me because there is I've experienced large banks, Bank of America, Chase, Wells Fargo. For example, Wells Fargo have refused to open an account for a single member LLC of a church, or a church that's not on, that didn't file for recognition of tax exempt status, and they're not in Pub 78. So they've adopted practices that are just like, you either have to be on the IRS website, or we're not going to open a bank account for you. So I have seen a squeeze by large banks, but more out of just adopting certain policies and practices. I haven't necessarily seen it targeting religion yet. Pleasure being with you. Thank you.
So now you know the latest and the greatest. And now, unfortunately, we kind of turn the page. And by the way, the slides and an important handout are contained in your handout material. Let's go back to the beginning. Lacey Cooper is here now with us, and hers was the first set of slides in our handout. Lacey is a member of our Church and Ministry Law Practice Group, 15 years as a county and federal prosecutor, came to our firm from the U.S. Attorney's Office, where she led a team of people as the Border Security Section Chief. She has prosecuted cartels, gang members, and before joining U.S. Attorney's Office, she served as a deputy county attorney in Payson, where she prosecuted sexual offenders, predators, and has tried cases against child molesters and a child pornographer. She's trained in law enforcement's policies and procedures, and if your church or organization has the misfortune of being caught up in such an allegation, you'll find that there are two critical elements that you must deal with. The first one is, of course, the criminal justice system, where Lacey adds a very unique perspective. The second is the media and the kinds of communication that you'll be making with your own staff, with your stakeholders, and then perhaps with the general media. So I'm delighted to have Lacey as part of our staff, and I think you'll find her insights are very valuable. I would definitely take notes on this part of the presentation. Lacey.
Okay, all the tall men came before me. Bible nerds, fill in the blank for me. In this world, you will have. Exactly. If you said trouble or trials or tribulations or hardships or persecutions, you are correct. Dare I say crises sometimes. If you said comfort and safety and ease, I don't think you need have read that part of the scripture. You need to go back and take a look at it, because that's the promise that we have, is that we are going to face some hard times. And sometimes we're going to face hard times specifically because we are in ministry. That's just the nature of the beast. So when those issues come up, we have a plan to assist you with that. Examples. And these may or may not be examples related to issues that have come up with actual church and ministry clients that we have had over the last several years. A 15-year-old girl in your youth group accuses a youth leader of sexual abuse. What do you do? An ex-employee files an EEOC complaint against you for race discrimination or sex discrimination or gender discrimination. What do you do? An anonymous blogger is posting about internal discussions that you've been having amongst your staff. You don't know who it is, but they're painting you and your organization in a false light, or at least a negative light. A board member is accused of grooming behavior. A former elder is arrested for a sex crime. An attendee at your organization or church is stalking one of your staff members. A neighbor has threatened to tear down your wall. A parent thinks something happened to their child while in your nursery care but can't prove it, but is sure it happened. A staff member alleges she's been sexually harassed by one of your senior leaders. Money has gone missing from your accounts. Or maybe it's the local Palestinian protester who's decided to set up shop on your front doorstep. Very real examples of the types of crises that your organization might face. So what we're going to do today is dive into some suggestions for things that you might need to be considering in how you respond to those types of crises. Now, the first thing you're going to do for any, I'm seeing it on my end, but not up here. There we go. The first question that you are going to ask yourself is the crisis that I'm looking at a safety issue, or am I merely concerned about reputational harm for my organization? Because the types of responses that you are going to look to are going to be heavily dependent on that question. If there is an actual threat to the safety of your staff members, to the people who come on your campus, to your community members and neighbors, then you're going to have to take some pretty aggressive action to protect people from harm. If we're just talking about the reputational harm of your organization, we encourage folks to take a beat, take a pause. You might feel really upset about that person who wrote that negative Google review about your organization. But is it worthy of your attention, even though it feels really upsetting at the time? Is this something that is really a crisis, or is it something that if you ignore it is going to go away tomorrow? Should you pour some fuel on that fire or just let it fizzle out? This is a, oh, I feel like there we go. Thanks. Very real example of a church where a Palestinian protester had decided to set up shop and arrange some protests there, not because he was a church member, not because the church had done anything specifically directed toward him, mostly because they were down the street and he could walk there easily. And he started to post things about organizing a protest on that campus. And they were pretty negative things, calling the members of this church and their leadership racist white bigots, for instance, which is troubling, right? That's a difficult thing to read about your staff and your congregation, but is it worthy of your attention? I may not have audio here, but here's the protester. He's actually got a protest going. He's taunting the church members. He's taunting their security team. He's taunting the police officers who had come out to assist. He's acting like he's going to walk onto their church campus when he's been told that he can't go onto the church campus. He's actually taking steps onto the church campus, and he's encouraging his fellow protesters to do the same. They eventually do walk onto the campus, and some of the protesters leave behind some pamphlets in the same place that the church had some of their publications. That's stickers and things that said "Burn all Bibles," and they also found this vest with some things attached to it that made it seem like very troubling. So this is an example of maybe initially this was just a threat of reputational harm, right? Somebody on the internet, on Instagram, is calling this church a group of racist white bigots, but eventually it turned into a threat of physical harm, and local PD had to get involved, and this gentleman was arrested. Okay, let's talk about some possible action steps that you can take. Well, as I already said, one of the things that you might do is notify the police. Just so you know, if there is an allegation of sexual abuse of a child or physical abuse of a child, and you have reason to believe that that allegation has merit, then you absolutely have to report to the police. You don't have a choice. For most of you, you are mandatory reporters, anybody who has responsibility for the care of a child. And let me just quickly say that there was a Court of Appeals decision this year. We've always been telling our clients that if you have like a church volunteer that works in the nursery and child care, that they are a mandatory reporter. And there was a Court of Appeals decision this year that affirmed what we had been telling clients, because there's this catch-all provision in the mandatory reporter statute for anyone who has responsibility for the care of a child. And this decision said it's a factual question whether, for instance, a Sunday school teacher has responsibility for the care of a child when they're in that role, or a babysitter has responsibility for the care of a child when they're in that role. So it's a pretty broad thing. You assume that you are a mandatory reporter. We're going to talk through how to notify the police, or if you have a threat at your facility, or if someone, you're going to go ahead and call the police. If there is any possibility of somebody suing you that might trigger your insurance coverage, you're going to go ahead and file a claim. It helps to just go ahead and get one on file, even if nothing has happened yet. It preserves your right to collect on your insurance policy later. So if there's something that happens on your campus or with one of your employees, you're going to notify your insurance carrier. You got to preserve all written and electronic records of what happened if there potentially is a lawsuit coming down the pike. Who here likes to text message with your colleagues at work? Everybody's raising, got to raise your hands. Of course you do. Who here text messages about business of your employment? Not just what your Starbucks order is, right? But actually the ongoings of your operations of your organization. A lot of people do. Did you know that those text messages could be discoverable in a future criminal or civil proceeding? And the moment that something bad happens on campus, somebody is going to tell you, an attorney is going to tell you that you have to go look through your phone and preserve all of your text messages with your colleagues that might relate to that particular incident. And maybe the date that the incident happens, you are really careful about what you say about that particular employee that you've been having a problem with, because you think, ooh, now I got a problem. I better make sure I'm careful about my text messages. But you forgot that you've been talking about that employee for the last year with your colleagues and gossiping about them on your text message, and those texts are going to be problematic when it comes time for discovery in your civil or criminal proceeding. If you do not preserve written or electronic records, the judge in a case can give an adverse inference instruction, which basically tells the jury, you can assume that there's something on that text messages that would have been hurtful to that party, or else they wouldn't have deleted it. Here's another complication. A lot of folks have electronic storage that writes over itself. Think about your surveillance cameras. They just auto delete, auto write over because you only have so much storage. If you don't take the time to go and preserve surveillance camera footage at the time that an event happens on your campus, and then you lose that because you didn't think to preserve it before the auto write over function happened, then you're going to have a problem with your retention. So we actually have a sample. I think it may come up at the end of my slides here. It's probably in your materials as well, of the type of letter that we would have you send to your staff if something did happen on your campus or with your employees where you did need to preserve records. And it just says, hey, everybody, go preserve your text messages. Hey, tech guy, go preserve all of our electronic records. We just need to have everything. And the lawyers will sort out later whether the everything actually has to get turned over in discovery or not. In some cases, we will work with you to ban a person from a campus. So let's say you have somebody who's actually threatening or harassing folks on your campus, and you just really want them to not be able to come to your campus. What you can do in Arizona, if you are the owner of the property or if you get consent from the landlord, you can tell someone that they're not allowed to come to your campus anymore. I think we used to call that 86ing them, You give them notice that they're no longer allowed on your campus. Even though your campus is a public space where folks come and go all the time, this particular individual is told that they no longer have the right to step foot on your private property, okay? And then, if they do, you can call law enforcement, and law enforcement can choose to prosecute them for the crime of criminal trespass. That's what happened with the Palestinian protester example. We usually require you to personally serve that letter to the person, because at some point we're going to have to prove that they had actual notice that they weren't a member of the general public anymore that was allowed to just come and go freely from your space, that they were somebody who hadn't noticed that they weren't allowed to be there anymore. You can get an injunction against workplace harassment. Just briefly, when we're talking about harassment, there's usually two types. One is an injunction against harassment that follows the person, and the other is an injunction against workplace harassment that follows the place, the location. So an injunction against harassment is what you get when there's two or more events of someone feeling seriously alarmed, annoyed, or harassed, and that individual gets protected. You can no longer communicate with him or her. An injunction against workplace harassment, if you have one incident of a threat to harm, a physical harm or property damage, you can get an injunction against workplace harassment that says this person can't come to your workplace anymore or communicate with any of the people at your workplace anymore. So sometimes we use this as a tool for organizational entities. If somebody is a threat to kids, you might provide a photo to your children's ministry to make sure that they know that that particular person, though allowed on our campus, is not allowed to be anywhere near children. Okay, so they can't come in our children's ministry area. If the incident involves an employee, you might have to terminate that employee, and you might consider whether that's with or without some sort of severance and separation agreement. Depends on the seriousness of the issue that's raised. If the incident involves a director or an officer of your organization, you're going to have to follow your bylaws to remove that person from that office. If you have an organization that has a church membership, then you're going to have to decide how to revoke that person's church membership. So these are all the things that you're going to be thinking through to separate yourself from this individual. You might also be saying, well, Lacey, can't we just sue them? Sometimes, yes, you can. Let me just tell you, suing is a terrible experience to go through. And I say that as somebody who helps people through that process all the time. So, for instance, I often get claims or requests from people, okay, can we sue for defamation for these terrible things that are being said about us online? The answer is defamation is a very hard claim to prove, and it's because you have to prove that there is a false statement of fact. It can't be an opinion. It has to be a statement of fact. It has to be that Bob drives a red car. Is that true or is that false? Has to be provably true or false. It can't be Bob drives a crummy car, okay? And then it has to be actually false. And then you have to be negligent, depending on the status of the person I'm talking about whether you were saying that truthfully or falsely, and it has to be something that actually defames. So there's a lot of things that go into that consideration. And what I see most often is that people are saying their opinions about organizations online, and they're very upsetting opinions, but those do not constitute defamation. So we would not encourage you to bring a lawsuit in that situation. Maybe somebody can help me move to the next slide here. This is an example that we use for folks who want to allow someone to come on their campus, but maybe that individual has demonstrated in the past that they were a threat to persons or children, for instance. Maybe they're a registered sex offender, but we're the type of campus that is interested in letting people come on our campus. You might let them come, but under a limited participation agreement that says you can come on our campus, but only if you follow these 8 very restrictive rules and have monitoring and can't go in the kids department and that sort of thing. So if you have a situation like that, we can certainly work through that with you. Bob, where am I at? How many? 2 minutes, great. I'm almost done here. Then the next big question that you will ask is, who do I tell about this terrible thing that's happened, or this maybe terrible thing that's happened? And what we see is that a lot of times folks are too quick to say, I just need to get in the pulpit and tell my entire congregation that there's an allegation that's been made. Maybe not. Let's not jump too quickly to spreading that an allegation was made. You're going to ask some questions about, who does this affect? Who has been directly involved in this incident? Are there any individuals who are under an actual threat of harm? Can I quantify the people who are being impacted by these social media statements and these Google reviews that are being posted? Can I qualify them? Are they bots? You know, the people who are commenting on it, are they my congregation members? Even better, are they my members? Are they my staff members who are expressing concern? Okay, well, in that case, I might need to go to some of those people and have a conversation about the issue that's going on and make sure that we're all on the same team. But if it's some generic posts that are going on the internet, it may not be worth any response from you. Just let it go. That's the world we live in. Here's an example, a real example of somebody who's posting on their social media with this photo about the church that is alleged to have allowed some harm to happen. Abuse in the church. Boy, that's hard to see if you're the target of that. It's just really difficult to receive that information, especially when you know that you have been working so hard in your ministry, and you've been working so hard to make sure that child and sexual abuse doesn't happen on your campus, and then somebody's making this allegation against you online. We're going to encourage you to just don't take the bait. Sometimes that's all that is an attempt by someone to get you to take the bait. Let's see how it goes. Let's see if there's anybody who's actually impacted by these messages online. And if you get in a situation where you actually need a media response plan, we can work with you on that. You might need to hire a public relations firm. You might need to designate somebody to be your primary spokesperson. We might need to give you some talking points that are okay to say publicly that don't get you in trouble or won't get used against you later in some lawsuit. You might need to make some restrictions on what can and can't be posted on your social media platforms. You might even have to put out a press release in a more egregious situation of an employee who actually does something that is provably, abuse of a child or something like that. So we'll walk through those steps with you when the time comes to figure out what's really our best media response plan. Bob, I think other than making sure that the litigation hold letter, Bob, is actually in their materials, right? Okay. So there should be something, a slide or something in your materials. Nope, it's not coming up here, but that if you do need to tell your employees to preserve their written electronic communications, there's a sample there, but we can work on that with you if the time comes. And maybe I should have said that your very first response to a crisis is to call us, and we'll work through it with you because we do this with clients all the time. Okay. Thanks, Bob.
So, short people. So, if we've learned one thing over the last 30 plus years of dealing with various church and other parachurch ministries when they're facing some sort of media event, and by the way, I really don't like the word crisis, and I don't recommend you use it. It's an event. The emotional value that you attach to it is mostly going to be driven by you. And I would tell you, if there's one rule to take away, it's the first rule of first aid. Does anybody remember that? It's also what doctors are sworn to uphold. It's first, do no harm. So it's so easy to make things worse by reacting to a comment. For example, I watched a church there was a Facebook group that had like 20 people in it that were talking about something that a youth pastor might or might not have done umpteen years ago. Well, the pastor went into a pretty serious state of concern about it and tried to deal with the problem in front of 3,000 people. We just went from 20 people knowing it to 3,000, and once you ring the bell, you can unring it. The second rule is don't repeat the charge, because most of the people didn't hear it in the first place. So you really need to think through, let the emotion go, take a deep breath, and remember the first rule of first aid. Okay, that's enough of the sadness and woe. Now, on to the more mundane. So in your material, I've included 6 elements, and we're only going to talk about a couple of them, but these are good resources for you, so I wanted to draw your attention to them in your material. Number 1 is I'm going to talk briefly about 6 reasons why corporate minutes matter. And anybody who can stay awake through reason number 4 gets a cup of coffee. Number 2 is the more fun part we're going to do in a minute, and that is how to seriously annoy your auditor or tax preparer or Monica. It's not easy, but it can be done. Then we're going to give you some quick tips for taking better minutes. So very much a practical takeaway for you. I've included my secret sauce, super format for minutes that work well. If you'll take a minute and look at those minutes, and then take your bylaws and read, there's some blanks in the minutes. It says like the definition of a quorum. Put it down, go to your bylaws, look it up, and see what the bylaws defines as the quorum. Write it in, leave it in your form, Thereafter, you will automatically know that when you have 3 people, 3 directors there, per your bylaws, you're meeting the quorum. So that's what's called a self-proving document. We try to build in the elements from your bylaws right into your minutes form. The other thing that you'll see there, very prominently displayed, is a list of the directors, when they took office, and what their term is. Would anyone care to guess how many hours of my life were spent trying to figure out whether or not the people currently listed on the Arizona Corporation Commission were actually directors or not? It was long enough ago that I had hair. That's how long. I've also given you a sample unanimous consent resolution. The unanimous consent resolution is a wonderful tool because if all your directors agree on something, you don't have to have a meeting. You can write it up, send it around, get everybody to sign it or even docu-sign it, and it's now the same legal effect as if you had had a meeting. So if you have questions about using that form, call me, but take a look at that unanimous consent form. It's item number 5 in your handouts there. It's really very, very useful tool, especially in the summer when half your board's up in the White Mountains fishing and don't really want to talk to you. And number 6, the last page of the handouts, is a fairly detailed corporate checkup. That's for those of you who really didn't feel enough pain in the day today and thought, I know, let's go home and go through a 22-page checklist of all the things I didn't want to think about. I put them all there for you. It's a beautiful thing. All right. 6 reason minutes matter. Part 1. Advance the slide, please. There is basically, truly, only one reason that we have a corporation or that you have a corporation, and it's to protect your personal assets. So when the impetuous youth pastor, I love youth pastors, nothing personal, crashes the church van and they start figuring out who to sue, if they try to sue you because you happen to be on the board of directors or just and be another employee, you will have a corporate shield. The corporate shield says you are not liable for the debts of your corporation. If you are not a corporation, see me afterwards. I'll give you a free Butterfinger and a quick talk on how quickly we can get you incorporated, because if you're not using a corporation or limited liability company, you are personally liable for the events that happen at your church events. It's not a great plan, trust me. So that's number 1. That's why we do corporations, because we want to have a corporate shield. Number 2 reason is because if you have a corporate entity with a separate checking account, it's going to be a lot easier if you're audited to prove that the donations which were received are truly tax deductible. And you've heard Monica in all kinds of detail about why all that becomes important later, but that's a second important reason is IRS compliance and state government compliance. The third reason is because we want to comply with state law. It's very useful to have a corporate entity in the name of your church listed on the Arizona Corporation Commission website. However, and it becomes helpful, for example, if you're trying to open a checking account or do some business with somebody, they can go on the website and confirm that you are a corporation and that you are in good standing. Things go a lot more smoothly. You don't have to list your home address, so do not list. Well, you can if you want to, I guess, but I wouldn't recommend it. You'll get a lot less junk mail. And so if you're a director or an officer, you can list the church address. Be sure that you calendar somebody in your organization to remember to file the annual report. If you don't file the annual report for a corporation, guess what happens? They revoke your charter, and pretty soon you're not a corporation anymore. Number 3, they will also, the State of Arizona Corporation Commission will revoke your corporate charter if you do not have a currently listed statutory agent with a valid address. So it's really important to keep that stat agent. Okay, Monica, let's see here. We've got just a couple more reasons, and then Monica will come up and tell you not how to annoy her. Number 3, if you have any licenses, like you might have a sales tax license, it would be very helpful if you're a corporation. If you want to maximize your insurance protection, Kevin Norton's going to talk about that. It's important to have a corporation. If you want to avoid bank hassles, a corporation, again, will be helpful, especially now since they can't debank you. And number 6, litigation pain. To minimize litigation pain, follow your bylaws. If you don't like your bylaws, come see me, we'll rewrite them so you like them, and then you can follow them. But it's important because the court will look at your bylaws. Part 2. Monica, thank you for coming up.
You're welcome.
So what's the number one way, let's advance our slide here. What's the number one thing when you go out on an audit? There we go. How to seriously annoy. What's the number one way to really seriously annoy Monica?
My pet peeve, for those of you who file 990s, you have to provide us a list of officer and directors that served at any time during the year. Now that sounds like a simple task, right? Last week, Nancy came to me and said, I can't believe it. I have somebody who got it right. Because the vast majority of the time, they don't have records of who came on the board, who's on the board, who left the board in a 12-month period. And of course, we always go to the Corporation Commission site to see what they think the officers are. And it's a very rare case where that list is correct. You cannot just file that once a year and be done, right, Bob?
Yeah, and by the way, it's really important on that note. The posting on the Arizona Corporation Commission website of the current officers and directors is not legally controlling. It's merely a notice. It's like having a sign or something in your front yard. But the controlling document is your minute book. So what actions have been taken by your board of directors or members electing officers and directors, that's controlling. It's very helpful if you keep them current on the Corporation Commission website.
Right. So, and then as an auditor, we have the same issue. So we always, audits, compilations, and most reviews, we will ask you for your minutes. And we will invariably see that you didn't elect any officers or directors, because if it isn't written, Bob, what happens?
It didn't happen.
Right. So we will see that in the minutes. We also have people who can't find minutes. Like, well, you only had 2 meetings, but your church calendar shows you had 12 meetings. Where are the rest of the minutes? And so you've got to take these things kind of seriously, because things that you do in a board meeting can affect your financial statements and your tax return. So for those of you who are filing 990s, it's very important that you document that.
How do you like the 22-page minutes of the meeting?
I don't care what Bob or Ed or Joe said about the situation. I just want to know what was discussed, what was approved, if there were any caveats to the approval, I want to know that. But I don't care that, what the discussion was up to that point. So minutes should not be 1 page, and minutes should not be 20 pages. There's a fine line there between documenting what happened and getting way too long.
And let me give you a little quick rabbit trail about why that's important. If you think about it, a corporation is an artificial legal person. You can't touch it, right? It doesn't exist out there. So if this artificial legal person, legally speaking, can own property, borrow money, have employees, have a checking account, this legal person can do all kinds of things. How does the artificial legal person that doesn't have hands or legs do something? It does it by its authorized agents. And its authorized agents get authorized how? with a board resolution. When the board of directors that are the controlling authority of your corporation meet at a properly noticed meeting at which a quorum was present and voted by a majority, that resolution then becomes the official legal act of the corporation. And it could say, the board hereby authorizes Monica Stern to go buy a $10 million church. Super. That's legally binding against the church because it's an official action. You don't have to do that to buy a new copy machine. But important stuff, folks, important stuff. And then we don't really care all the arguments for or against it. We really just care that it passed by a majority vote, because that's the important part, and that's compliance with the doctrine of corporate formalities. So the auditors naturally are looking for
large contracts, material transactions. We're also looking for any potential legal issues, so if, if there's something that has happened or notice of a lawsuit, although we will ask you specifically for that information. And that's not required on the 990, but it is important that those, and this should not be a low-level employee keeping minutes. It needs to be somebody who understands how to keep minutes. It needs to be the Corporation Commission report. I can't tell you the number of organizations I have seen where their board all started in 2002 and it's never been changed. So I'm pretty sure your board changes over the years. So people just click file and don't pay attention. And if you're filing a 990 particularly, it's really important that we have that information.
So the traditional vehicle for keeping all this stuff together was called a minute book. It was just a 3-ring notebook. You punch holes in it. You put a copy of your articles of incorporation in. You put a copy of your bylaws. You put your organizational minutes, the first meeting of your board. And thereafter, praise God, let me hear a big amen, hallelujah, we put the rest of the minutes in there too.
Hey!
I know it's a miracle when it happens, but sometimes it does happen.
It's so rare that we get a comment that says, hey, their board of directors is actually right.
Now, if you're going to put the minutes in there, does somebody remember a document I talked about a minute ago called a unanimous consent resolution? And what did that document do for you? Documented a major decision. I wonder if we should put a copy of those in the minute book. Yes. Amen. So, the idea is this minute book, I really do recommend still having a paper minute book. You can digitize it if you want, not a bad idea. Scan it, keep it. Send us a copy if you want. We'll put it on our permanent record. So when you lose yours, we'll find ours and send it back to you. Or we give your auditor a copy every year of the digital increases in your minute book. And life goes so much smoother in that fashion. All right, so let's see what else. Let's advance our slide.
We talked about those, yeah. Major decisions need to come to the tax preparer or auditor.
Why would you want to sign and date a copy of your bylaws? Anybody have an idea why that would matter over, I don't know, the course of a 30-year life of a church? I literally was presented with 4 versions of bylaws from one of my clients who will remain unnamed, 3-letter Christian church. No, I'm sorry, Christian school, of the Christian school. The only way I knew the oldest one, it was in courier type. So I threw that one away, but I don't know which of the other 3. I just picked one I liked and on we went, but who knew? So anyway, signing and dating the minutes and the bylaws is really important because over time, being able to prove when something happened many times is 95% of the battle. Okay, let's see. This is kind of, Monica, you have your own little checklist, I guess, I assume.
Right.
For example, if you wanted to dissolve your corporation or merge or add another one, would you want to have that documented? Yeah.
Yep, it's required for the Corporation Commission, so
we
would send you to Bob for a dissolution, though. But we would help you with the tax matters. So, yeah. And what about lawsuits, Bob?
Oh, yeah, lawsuits. So, Kevin, if you get called on a lawsuit, oh, yeah, he said, he said he always wanted to just be a pretty face. So he said, all right, come on up. So, how do lawsuits interact with the insurance in this context?
Well, there's insurance coverage called directors and officers liability insurance.
That could be fun. How does that work?
That will protect the directors and officers and others that are named in the policy against financial damages because the board made a decision and somebody claimed they suffered because of that decision, or even a failure to make a decision on something and somebody claims they suffered financially.
So you're saying if I was the lowest evil form of life on the planet, a plaintiff's attorney, thinking of trying to sue the church, I might sue the directors in their personal name?
Yes, exactly.
Now, I wonder how that's going to play when the process server comes to my house at 8 o'clock at night, serves me as a director, and also serves my wife.
Wow.
It's not a pretty sight.
It's not a pretty sight.
And in that case, does the church's general liability insurance cover me personally?
No, it does not. General liability does not cover the directors and officers for their decisions causing financial damage.
So you're saying if I'm going to be a director on a corporation, which could include a church, I ought to have a little mental checklist. And one of those items is,
Directors and officers.
and if there
liability.
is no D&O coverage, what do? Take up fly fishing. I'm serious. I mean, it's a pretty serious matter.
And I'll get calls from churches and nonprofits where they say, we've got a new board member coming on and they want to know about our board of our directors and officers liability insurance.
And you say you don't have any? Is that?
Or I say they've got it and they're fine to serve.
Yeah, there really are some kind of non-negotiable if you're worried about your personal assets. Now, if you're already broke, don't worry about it. I mean, because you don't have anything to lose, you're not going to care. Well, I mean, your wife's still not going to be very happy with you over getting served personally, but you won't have anything to lose, so it's not as much of a problem. Let's move our slide one more ahead here. Mm-hmm. All right, so Monica, would it be important to have a separate checking account in the name of the church?
Yes. If the funds are not in the name of the corporation, that is the church, all those donations are personal income to whosever name is on that account. So I don't see this very often, except when a church is just starting out. They're like, well, we need to get the offerings in, so the pastor goes and opens a bank account and puts his social security number down. And suddenly I say, well, I need to look up your articles of incorporation on the Corporation Commission, and we haven't done that yet, but they're collecting offerings. So that's a huge problem, particularly if you're using credit card processing at all, because it's going to give you a nice big fat form at the end of the year with those donations. So contributions made to the pastor are not deductible. Contributions made to the church corporation are.
So the board was out of town. We needed a new copy machine. I opened up a new credit card in my name, but I wrote on the little note, Bob's account for the church, thinking not a problem.
That is a problem. all credit cards, and we see this really commonly. People will, I just used my personal credit card for the church business. And that is not good. You need to open a credit card in the church's name. Now, you might be required to sign a guarantee for it. That's pretty common. But the credit card account should be in the church's name. And then you control the use of those credit cards by receiving the statements. We had one pastor who was charging about $90,000 a month on his own personal credit card and then getting reimbursed for it and racking up all kinds of reward points and travel points. And, those should belong to the church. Those are not individual. And we were auditing at the time and wrote a reportable condition on that's not acceptable, because the church is foregoing those cash rewards or foregoing the travel rewards, and that's just taking money away from the church.
It's also a crime, isn't it? An Erven.
Yeah, well, you could argue.
I wouldn't like to defend it in front of the IRS
No,
because you've
I
diverted.
wouldn't either.
So what's even worse than using your personal card for church business? What's even worse than that?
Using the church card for your personal business. And yeah, and
We're starting to see a pattern.
we're gonna talk about that a little later in the program.
Okay, all right.
How that happens.
One of my favorites.
Okay.
All right, so we've already talked about that one. Let's advance our
Right
slide one
yeah.
more.
Yeah.
Don't worry about keeping receipts or commingling personal or corporate funds and accounts. It's called the shoebox method, and you only need one shoebox for your stuff and the church's.
Yeah.
Now, here's the problem, and this is just a little short rabbit trail. You remember why we do corporations in the first place? Anybody remember point one? Personal liability. In order for the court to grant you personal liability and honor that corporate shield, they're going to ask a couple of questions. Courts often do that. And the questions are like, oh, did you treat this corporation like it was a separate legal person? Or did you just kind of mush everything together and commingle your funds? The sound you hear in the background is the death knell of your corporate shield. It just took a major torpedo amidships. So commingling funds is a big one.
Right. Exactly.
And I assume that's a major audit.
Oh, we wouldn't even audit somebody who was commingling funds. We would stop the audit. We won't do an audit unless we're pretty sure you're going to pass the audit. And if we see things initially going in that are big red flags, we won't even attempt an audit, because why pay six figures for something that is going to say you do a horrible job? So we don't want to do that.
Yeah. Kevin, do you have any special favorite horror stories that kind of tune in on boards of directors or other things that our congregants here might find useful?
We've had a couple of board of directors and officers liability claims over the years, having to do with a conflict of interest. The church hired a contractor. The contractor happened to be on the board, and then something went south, and there were some claims and issues, and somebody claimed financial damages because of something the contractor did, and there's a lawsuit.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So one of the things you can do for fun, it's item number 12 or so on your little checklist at the end. Go back and take a look at your minute book or your articles and corporation bylaws, etc., wherever they're all filed, and see if you have a document called Conflict of Interest Policy. And while you're at it, see if you have a whistleblower policy, and just for fun, see if you've got a document retention policy as well. If you don't call Monica, because she's not going to audit you. Those can be pretty serious issues. Seriously, the lack of a conflict of interest policy can be a major problem if you get into a legal jam.
The IRS 990 asks if you have all of those things, and they also ask if you have any transactions with board members. So those have to be disclosed, and so therefore we need to know who's the related parties. Who are you working with the related party?
Monica, I think that wraps up the legal.
Keep me happy, keep me happy.
Let's hear it for Monica.
Don't make your
Happiness.
tax preparer. Keep Nancy and Cindy and Julie happy too. Okay, I'm going to introduce Kevin Nortons now. We're going to talk a little bit more about insurance, and then I'll be up after Kevin. Thanks.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Kevin Norton. I am with Lightwell Insurance. Lightwell Insurance is an insurance agency dedicated to the church, to Christian schools, mission organizations, and other types of nonprofit organizations. And I see many friends here in the audience, people I've known for many, many years, and we count it a privilege to help continue to serve the church. what I wanted to talk about was there are many different types of liability insurance. And a lot of times with new nonprofits or new church starts and so forth, I'll get a call and say, we just formed a new nonprofit. We want some liability coverage. And then I'll ask a few questions, you know, what are you looking for? Well, we're having an event in the park and I need a certificate of insurance. Well, that's general liability insurance. Or if they say, well, we've got a board and some of our board members are concerned. So I say, well, that's directors and officers liability insurance. So there's a number of different types of liability insurances that are available. And I just wanted to take in the few minutes that I've got this morning, just go over the different types of liability insurance. So on the slide, the first one is general liability, which I would say is the most common. When we talk about what is covered under general liability, the covered damages are bodily injury and property damage. A child gets injured on the church playground and there's a lawsuit. That's a general liability claim. A volunteer driving an unlicensed golf cart on the church property to cart people around, they run into another vehicle. They damage somebody else's property. That's general liability. A church attender trips in the parking lot and injures themselves. That's general liability. Bodily injury and property damage claims are general liability coverage. Who's the covered activities are your premises. Obviously, everything that goes on your church property is covered, but it also covers your activities. Churches just don't do activities on their premises, do they? A lot of church activities take place off premises. And so general liability will also cover those too. The youth are off doing something. The youth are climbing this, they're jumping off of this. There's church retreats, church camps. General liability is meant to cover injuries that happen for those types of activities too. Coverage trigger is an occurrence basis, and all that means is the coverage is triggered by when the occurrence happened. So if the occurrence happened July 1st, 2025, which insurance policy is going to take care of it? The policy that was in force in 2025. And who is covered under general liability? The corporation is covered, the board members are covered, employees and volunteers. So if there's a hole in the parking lot and somebody trips and falls and there's a lawsuit and they sue the board because they didn't fix the parking lot, are they covered under that? Yes. So the board of directors is covered under general liability insurance, but it's separate and distinct from directors and officers liability coverage. The next one is directors and officers liability coverage, with Bob talked a lot about in the previous section. But what are the covered damages here? On directors and officers, it's not bodily injury and property damage, it's financial damages that somebody might suffer because of the acts of the board. And when they say covered acts, it's wrongful acts arising out of decisions of the board. The coverage triggers can be occurrence and claims made, and I won't get into the differences between those. Occurrence is always preferred when you're looking at the different types of general liability coverage forms that are out there. But who is covered? The entity, the board members, and others. So it's very important when you look at your directors and officers liability coverage to look at the coverage form and to see who is covered under the form. Now, churches have all different kinds of names for their church boards, don't they? Some churches have elders, some of them have advisory boards, some of them have deacons, some of them have trustees. But you want to make sure that the coverage is going to cover the governing board of the organization. Now, the company that I represent is Brotherhood Mutual, and Brotherhood Mutual's directors and officers liability coverage form says we're going to cover the governing board, the leaders of the church, the employees, volunteers, appointed persons, and even the spouses, as long as they're doing something within on behalf of the church. So you want to look at who is covered under directors and officers liability. Then we have other types of liability coverage. Employment practices. Employment practices will cover the employment issues, the HR issues that come up. And the covered damages there are going to be compensatory damages and emotional injury. You know, we might, if there's an issue, we might owe wages. We might owe future wages. Maybe they suffered emotionally. They say they can't get a job because of what the church did to me. You know, so employment practices is going to cover those types of damages. And you have to look at the policy to see what types of wrongful acts are covered. But I gave a couple here: discrimination, harassment, wrongful termination, and other types of workplace torts. And this could be even in the hiring. You know, somebody you didn't even employ, but you were hiring for a position. You didn't hire somebody, and you said you didn't hire them because of this or that. And it could be something illegal that you did. So this will cover those types of instances too. And again, who's covered? The entity, the board, the executives, the managers, and others. And what do I say? What do I mean when I say they're covered? That just means if there's a lawsuit and the church gets sued and the HR director gets sued and maybe the department head gets sued, they will all be covered. We will defend each of those individuals, including the corporation. Next one is sexual misconduct and abuse liability. And, you know, any entity that is working with children and youth, and it doesn't exclusively need to be children and youth, because you can have sexual abuse claims from adults also, but you're going to need abuse liability. And this is going to cover bodily injury and emotional injury. Many times when there is an abuse claim or an abuse incident that comes up, they're not only talking about what happened, but they're talking about the damages, the emotional injury that this incident caused now and into the future. And so you want to make sure that you have sexual abuse liability, because general liability is not going to cover it. Directors and officers' liability is not going to cover it. You need to have separate abuse coverage to cover these types of occurrences. And it could be inappropriate behavior claims. It could be improper reporting. You know, we've already talked about the mandatory reporters. I have had claims over the years where something had happened and the victim said, well, I told my youth pastor 6 months ago what was going on at home, and they never reported it. And so you can see where the church can get dragged into a lawsuit there because they never reported something that they knew about as their role of a mandatory reporter. Again, who is covered? The entity, the organization, the board, the employees, and volunteers. Next, we have religious freedom liability, which is a big issue nowadays, and this is going to cover emotional injury. Somebody claims they were emotionally harmed because of what they heard the pastor preaching on at church. And so then there's a lawsuit claiming we didn't like what we heard. And it doesn't need to be somebody sitting in the pews or in the chairs. It could be somebody watching a live stream of the church and claiming they didn't like what they heard. And so there's a lawsuit. They probably will not be successful because obviously churches can preach and teach, you know, their beliefs. But you've got emotional injury claims coming from the communications, coming from your activities, and claims of discrimination. So I get calls all the time saying, this individual or this couple wants to use our facility for a wedding, but they don't align with our statement of faith, and we want to refuse renting our facility to them. Can we do that? Yes, you can do that. As long as you're following, you know, your guidelines and your statement of faith, yes, you can still do that. They can sue you, and yes, we'll defend you. They probably won't be successful, but yes, this coverage will protect those claims of discrimination. I even had a discrimination claim once where a church told a youth that he could not attend camp because he was a discipline issue, he was a behavior problem, and they weren't going to let him go to camp. Well, the parents of that youth were upset, and they filed a claim of discrimination against the church. That is covered under a religious freedom type of liability coverage. Counseling, just got a few more here. Counseling liability. Churches can have issues with their counseling departments. Pastors are doing counseling all the time. You know, you call it what you want: counseling, coaching, mentoring. that is considered counseling, and people can claim bodily injury or emotional injury because of the counsel and advice somebody at the church is giving them. And this is going to cover the entity, the corporation, pastors, employed and lay counselors. Now, a lot of churches will have counselors that are not employees of the church. They might be volunteers, but they are using them as a lay counselor because of their background and so forth. And we will cover all those types of individuals as long as they're counseling and have been authorized to counsel on behalf of the church or nonprofit organization. One that is a newer type of liability is security operations liability. So many churches now, and if I could ask, how many of you have safety and security teams? Most of you would raise your hand. There is specific liability coverage now that extends to the individual members of the security team, whether they're an employee or volunteer. But you can have claims of bodily injury and emotional injury. We've had claims before where somebody claims their rights, were infringed because the security team member, was asking them about their backpack or wanted to see what's in their backpack. And they claimed they were being singled out, and they claimed they're emotionally injured because of that. So you can have claims. Or some of your security teams are armed, and you can have, let's say they have to use their weapon and they hit somebody by mistake, and there's a lawsuit. Security operations liability will extend liability coverage to those individuals serving on the security team. But we will only cover those members of the security team while they're acting on behalf of the church and within the scope of their authorized duties. So if you told your security team they can't be armed and somebody went ahead and carried their weapon and used it, they're acting outside of the scope of their duties. Yes, that'll cover both employees and volunteers serving on the safety and security team. Good question. The last one I want to talk about is just umbrella or excess liability. So many churches will have $1 million of liability coverage. You can get additional liability limits over and above that to help protect the corporation, help protect the assets of the corporation. Some churches, are large, they have multi-million-dollar campuses. That's quite a bit of assets that they need to protect, so they can purchase additional amounts of liability over and above their regular liability. So that's just a quick overview on the different types of liability coverages that are available to churches and nonprofits. Thank you for your time.
Thank you, Kevin. That was very helpful. I think that we all kind of some people figure that your general liability covers you for everything, and that's not necessarily the case, as we learned. So it's important that that you have adequate coverage. I personally would not serve on a board that didn't have directors and officers coverage. So, I think it's important that you have the right coverage. So our next topic is applying for 501c3 status. For some reason, this past year was a flurry of phone calls about, we never applied for tax-exempt status. We're not legal with the IRS. Yes, you are if you are a church. So churches are automatically exempt from income tax under 501c3. They are specified. There's 14 criteria for churches, how the IRS decides if you're actually a church. But frankly, if it walks like a duck and quacks like a duck, you're probably a church under those 14 criteria. You don't need to meet them all, but you have to have a preponderance of criteria. So if you are a church, you are automatically exempt. You're not required to apply for exemption under 501c3 because you're automatic. Entities that are not churches, such as mission organizations or other religious organizations, freestanding religious schools that are not controlled by a church, those are not churches, and you must apply. So a religious entity is not the same thing as a church. All churches are religious organizations, but not all religious organizations are churches. So don't let that confuse you when you're looking at new entities. If you have an organization that's controlled by a church, so for example, a preschool, and the board either overlaps or the church board approves the preschool board, those can be integrated auxiliaries of a church because they are controlled and supervised by a church, and they may not need to apply. That's something you should review with either John or I, because you certainly don't want to assume you don't need to file for 501c3 status and then later find out you should have. Churches may apply for 501c3 status if they desire. There are some benefits. You'll have an official determination letter from the IRS that says we have determined that you are a 501c3. You'll be listed in the exempt organization search at irs.gov. So irs.gov, if you hit tax exempt entities, you can search for those. It'll come up there. It may make it easier to prove that the church is a 501c3. Some people are not familiar that not every organization has to apply. And you may be able to more easily access discounts and donations from businesses, although many of them limit donations anyway to churches, so that's really not a huge feature. The downside of applying is that you must apply using the full 1023 form, and that's like 48 pages. You don't have to fill out all 48 pages, but it's a long schedule. And there are additional schedules that you have to complete for churches. And if you have a school, there's additional schedules you have to complete for the school. You have to disclose salaries and benefits of your key employees and anybody who's an officer or director. So if your pastor is also president of the board, you're going to have to disclose the salary and benefits of those employees. And you have to provide up to 4 years of financial information or future budgets if you haven't been around for 4 years. And it has to be in the format prescribed by IRS on the form. So it takes a lot of gyration sometimes to get church financials into the format that IRS wants. You do have to disclose your doctrine and other religious matters, like how is membership done? Do you ordain? What is your book, your doctrine? So all of that has to be disclosed on the church schedule. And it is open to public inspection. What this means is if anyone asks to see your application for tax-exempt status, you have to let them look at it. 990s are open to public inspection, and so is the application for tax-exempt status. So I have done applications for churches. It's pretty rare, but generally those are churches who are leaving a group exemption through a denomination. So, maybe they were exempt under the Lutheran organization, and now they want to be an independent church, so sometimes they will apply. But, it can be done. The cost. The form is not do-it-yourself. Do not even consider filing a 1023 application by yourself. The problem is that the words printed on the paper are very different from what the instructions say they want on that line. It's not intuitive. IRS charges $600. Our fees generally range from $2,500 to $3,000 to complete it for a church, maybe a little more. And some people say, well, I don't want to have to file 990 every year, so I'm not going to apply for tax-exempt status. There's actually a provision. You can file for the application, and you can request exemption from filing the 990. So they're not one and the same. You can apply for the exemption without having to file 990s, but you do have to request that when you file the form. If you want to prove that churches are automatically tax exempt under 501c3, you can just download IRS publication 1828. It's a real helpful, friendly, plain English thing that says churches do not need to apply and they are automatically tax exempt. So sometimes I would just suggest you write a letter on letterhead, you refer to the attached pages of publication 1828, and that churches are automatically exempt if somebody questions you. The other thing that came up this year, and John and I have talked a little bit about this because it's been around for a while, but for some reason, Facebook ads and I get emails about why every church should be a 508c1a church. How many of you have seen those? Have you seen those solicitations? Yeah. And how, if you are the stupidest person on earth if you apply under 501c3. So it's just frustrating. I've had some conversations back and forth with the promoter about this. So 508, Section 508, just governs the fact that churches, among other organizations, do not have to file Form 1023 and Form 990 to get exemption under 501c3. So 508 is simply the code that says you don't have to file a 1023, you don't have to file a 990. So churches are completely exempt from filing those forms under 508. But 501 is the section that governs the tax exemption. So 508 doesn't govern tax exemption, it governs the form. 501 is the section that governs the tax exemption. So do not fall for this because it's just a way to get money out of you and jeopardize your organization. So these are the things they say. All 501c3 ministries have waived their rights. Okay, and their take on this is because you're not a 508 church. Now, I don't understand the logic. They said, well, 508 entities can do all the public or all the political work they want to do. They can participate in campaigns, et cetera, et cetera. No, 501 is what governs those activities. So another thing they say, filing an application for nonprofit status is not required under 508. We agree. It's not required. There's no annual income tax return requirements such as the Form 990. We agree. You don't need 508 as your 508 doesn't grant you tax status. 501 does. And that's true for all churches under 501c3. 501 refers you to 508 for filing. Okay? So just don't fall for the hype, and they want to convert your 501c3 to a 508 whatever. It's hogwash. So don't fall for it. Okay, our next topic is solar energy tax credits for nonprofits, including churches. So I want to talk about this because this one is time sensitive, and I want to make sure you guys are all still aware of the opportunities out here. So in 2022, the Inflation Reduction Act significantly changed the allowance of these tax credits for nonprofit organizations. Prior to this action, tax-exempt organizations couldn't benefit from the 30% tax credit because they didn't have any income tax. So it originally was only an income tax credit. And basically, churches don't have income tax. So you couldn't get a refund. So it was just 30% loss credit. And that's a big credit. It's dollar for dollar against taxes. So it's a big credit. So effective January of 23, tax-exempt organizations can receive a refundable investment tax credit of 30%. So it's refundable, meaning you get the money back regardless of your tax position. So it has to be less than 1 megawatt, which all church ones generally are. It's effective for the cost of the photovoltaic panels and the battery storage and water heating. So any of those will qualify for the credit. Has to be placed in service after 1/1/23. So if for some reason you did a solar project and you weren't aware that you get a credit, if you hooked it to the grid after 1/1/23, there's still time to claim a credit. The date is very important, placed in service. And this is what the tax code said. It means when the system is fully functioning as designed, which means it must be attached to the grid if it's that type of solar panel array. So timing does matter on this. So placed in service date, it's not when you finished it, it's not when you paid for it. It's when it's actually attached to the grid. So we want to be careful of these dates. The tax refund is claimed on 990T, which again is not do-it-yourself. Please do not do this yourself. The form is deceptively simple, but you'd be amazed at what can happen. Pre-registration is required. So I had a church this year that we did a project for. We went in online. We had to log in using id.me, and we will talk about that a little bit. So we had to upload the receipts, upload the building permit, there were a few documents. So you have to do that ahead of time before you file. And then you receive an approval to file. So there is the availability of an additional 10% tax credit, so 40% tax credit, if the project was beginning construction in 2024 or later. The problem is that the panels have to contain certain percent of U.S. domestic content. And the problem with that is those panels are 2 to 3 times more expensive in 2025 than a panel that doesn't have the domestic. So it's kind of like, well, that may not be such a good deal. So just be aware of that. You can get up to 40%. So the allowable costs for the panels are the panel, the inverter, the wiring, all the stuff that you see, the installation cost, the permits or development fees, storage batteries if you have at least 3 kilowatts, the sales tax, and more importantly is the car parking shade structures. You often see these in schools and churches where they build like a carport type thing and then they put the panels on top of it. That is allowable if the primary reason is for energy generating system. So you can't build a whole building and then put panels on it and take the whole cost, but you can build these structures that you do see that are supporting the panels if that's the primary reason. So that's the good news. The bad news is the One Big Beautiful Bill is canceling this program, but fortunately they allowed us some time. So to qualify for the 30% tax credit, you have 2 options. Construction must begin prior to July 4th, 2026. That is not a typo. That 2026 is 1 year after the date of enactment of this bill. Or if you don't start construction by then the entire project must be fully operational, i.e. connected to the grid, by 12/31/27. So you can see there's time that you can get this done still if you want to take advantage of this particular tax credit. So, and I know you can't read this, but it's in your handout with a magnifying glass. But basically, this is a summary that I did for my one church that we did apply for this year. And I asked them if I could share their, the utility bills. And so, in the first column are the 23 bills. The second column is the 24 bills. The third column is the 25 bills. And this system went on like January 10th of 2025. And so you can see the savings, that they're rendering. And I said, this is a pretty decent savings. And he said, well, actually a third of the panels weren't working during the first 5 months. So the savings are going to be better than this. So this shows you kind of the savings that can be generated. The cost of the system was $185,000. They are going to get a $55,500 refund in probably February next year for their tax credit. So that leaves a net cost of $129,500. We anticipated their projected annual savings would be $16,500. So the payback is just a little under 8 years. This is Arizona Public Service, so we all know, those of you who don't have to suffer through APS's incessant rate increases. So obviously the savings could change, but it's likely just to become bigger. So this is just a concrete example of their system. Their system is just under 71 kilowatts, so they absolutely qualify for that tax credit. They had it finished in December of '24, but it wasn't connected to the grid till January. So now we have to wait a whole year to apply for the refund. So, but that, it's still a decent refund. Okay, we are going to take a short break. Now, there is coffee now. We did run out, but we have replenished it, and there's still breakfast. Restrooms are down the hall. So if you can take a short break, and then I'll call you back to your seats in about 10 minutes. So we're going to watch a movie trailer, and then Julie Froke, she's an enrolled agent in our office, is going to talk about the trailer that you're about to see in the movie, that was the documentation that was done. So we'll go ahead and let's run the trailer, and then we'll have Julie come up.
$1 million is just unbelievable.
She lived quite a life, totally different life than what she portrayed here.
By day, she's wearing municipal clothes, and by night, she's dripping with jewels and furs.
World champion Rita Crundwell.
She had this grand, high-stakes horse empire.
My first thought was, Dixon has that much money? That you could embezzle that much money from a little tiny place like this?
People just trusted her so well, more than anything.
Rita, how did you go to bed and not think, whose lives I'm infecting here?
One of the things the FBI wanted to find out was, did she do this alone? Was she hiding for somebody else?
For 20 years, I worked side by side with this woman, and I never knew her. I never really knew her.
Pretty unbelievable, right? Shocking. So that was just a glimpse of the story of Rita Crundwell. And she was a woman who stole over $53 million from a little town in Illinois. And she had managed the finances for over 20 years. So what makes her story so shocking isn't just the amount she stole, it's how she got away with it for so long. She wasn't hiding in the shadows. She wasn't covering her tracks with some elaborate scheme. She was attending city meetings. She was getting awards and praised for her work, all while she was stealing this money. And why that worked for her was because people trusted her. So I'm going to talk a little bit about that trust, and not just the feeling of trust, but a trust as an internal control, and what happens and what can happen if it's your only control. So how many of you have seen the movie, the documentary? It's called All the Queen's Horses. So a few of you, it is really, really unbelievable story, and I would strongly recommend you watch it along with your board and really anyone involved in the finances of your organization. On my last slide of my presentation, you'll find where you can find the documentary. So who was Rita Crundwell? She was the controller and treasurer for Dixon, Illinois, and that's a little town with a population of about 16,000 people. She was known for being trustworthy and hardworking. She owned a quarter horse empire of over 400 horses, and she was the perpetrator of the largest municipal fraud in the US. $53 million with 179 transactions over 20 plus years. So how did she do it? She opened a fake bank account, and she called it the Reserve Sewer Capital Development Account, or RSCDA account for short. It looked like a legitimate city account, but she is the only one that had control over it. It was a secret account. She transferred money from official city accounts into this secret account using fake invoices and documentation to justify the transfers. So here is a fake invoice, or I'm sorry, a real invoice on this slide. And again, you would have to use a magnifying glass, but the next slide, oops, let's see here, is a fake invoice. And so if you look closely, you'll see the logo's missing, contact information is missing, the city name is presented differently, there's a spelling error, there's no details of the city's share and how that was computed, like the real invoice. And the verbiage on the total due is different. So if anyone had been paying attention, they would have noticed that there was an issue. But no one was paying attention because they trusted Rita. So the impact to this city was devastating over these years. I'm just going to cover a few of the ways this little town was impacted. So to compensate for missing funds, many city departments had deep budget cuts. People were laid off, and most of the staff did without raises for many years. Only 65 blocks of road were repaired or replaced over this period of time. And one road became so damaged it couldn't be used, with another road that just collapsed, and there was no money to repair it. First responders, there was a reduced level of service. There were slower response times, so we're talking police, fire, and emergency. And their vehicles, citizens reported ambulances going down the street that were smoking because there was no money to fix or repair. There were deferred projects and repairs, so projects that should have been done were either postponed or they were canceled. And this might have been street repairs, building repairs, the library. I mean, think of all the things that your city provides to you. Capital development projects. So with infrastructure in bad shape, some of the development and economic opportunities were likely delayed or foregone. And thinking of economic development, what businesses would want to move to this town that has, very deteriorating infrastructure, roads and city, city services? But probably just as devastating as that is just the damage that was done to public trust. So with so much mismanagement over 2 decades that wasn't caught, and this is taxpayer money, so you're paying taxes, and then you find out that somebody has stolen $53 million of it. Who was watching? And so the citizens, the public trust was eroded, and that made it harder going forward if they needed to increase taxes. I mean, think of it as a citizen. So that was devastating. So how was she caught? In 2011, while she was on vacation, the city clerk requested all of the bank statements from the bank. And in past, Rita had told her, just give the bank the list of statements that you need. And she had a list that she would give them. But that day she was busy, and so she just called the bank and said, send me all the statements for all the bank accounts for the city. And so she received a statement for this RSCDA account that she had never seen before and didn't know existed, and it had some very large, hundreds of thousands of dollars in transactions. And so she took the statement to the mayor, and the mayor contacted the FBI. So then there was a 6-month period where they were doing an investigation, and Rita and the mayor had to pretend like everything was normal, which was very stressful and difficult for them. She was arrested at City Hall on April 17th, 2012, and she was convicted of wire fraud and sentenced to 19 years and 7 months in federal prison. So her sentence was commuted by President Biden in December of last year, after she had served 11 years and 9 months in prison. And the people of the city of Dixon were not happy about that. So the key failure here was trusting one person completely without any checks or balances. Everyone trusted Rita. So that trust became a vulnerability. There was no segregation of duties. There was no independent review of bank statements. There was no internal controls or checks. So when one person controls everything without oversight, fraud can thrive, even for decades. So for churches and ministries, this should be a wake-up call. So what can we learn? Trust is not a control. It can be a vulnerability. Financial stewardship is both a spiritual and practical issue. Accountability is not a lack of faith, but a safeguard. And even faithful people face temptation. So this is called the fraud triangle. And a fraud triangle explains the environment that can lead someone to commit fraud. It has 3 parts. Opportunity, and that would be a situation that makes fraud possible. Most of the time, it's lack of controls. So with Rita, she had complete control of everything. So the opportunity was definitely there. Pressure. So that would be a personal need, and usually that's financial issue at home. I'm just going to borrow a little bit of money, I'll pay it back. So some kind of pressure in your personal life. And then rationalization. The person's justifications for their actions, convincing themselves it's acceptable. And that might be, well, they don't pay me enough anyways. So you justify it. So understanding these 3 elements can help your organization prevent fraud if you're looking for that. So what are some practical steps that we can do to implement just basic internal controls? Segregate duties. So not one person should be responsible for everything in financial matters. Require 2-person approvals for spending. Have multiple people review bank accounts or bank statements independently. So that might be when the bank statement arrives, it doesn't get opened, and it goes to the first person who's going to actually review the statement. So nothing can be altered in the statement before it goes to them. Encourage vacations. So that's how Rita was caught. When someone's away, some things may come to light. Establish spending limits. Require written approval for purchases over a set amount. Reconcile the bank accounts monthly. And I can't tell you how many clients we see that do not do this. And this would be such an easy way to catch fraud. So it's bank accounts, credit card statements, all of those things should be reconciled monthly. We have clients who reconcile all of the months at the end of the year before they give us their data for us to prepare the 990. Not kidding, and some of them don't enter information until it's time to give us the information. So you don't need to raise your hand if that's you. Have multiple people review the reconciliation. So they reviewed the statement when it came in. You do your work, or whoever does the reconciliations, and then several people should be reviewing that reconciliation, looking for things that are out of the ordinary. So look for someone who's living above their means. That's key. A lot of people, if you watch the documentary, people did question that. How does she have the money to buy a $2.1 million RV and 400 quarter horses and property in multiple states? She's a city worker. And so there were a lot of different ways people tried to justify that, but it is something to look for if someone working in your church is living way above their means. So if you see something, say something. Okay. Audits. An audit is not a substitute for internal control. So the city of Dixon had external audits every year, and the fraud was not uncovered. It should have been, but it was not. If they would have just looked at the invoices closely, which you do in an audit, you sample invoices. So it should have been caught. Fraud is caught by whistleblowers 43% of the time. So that's somebody like the city clerk in this case that saw something and said something. An external audit will catch fraud 7% of the time. So you can see that eyes on and people that are in your organization are a better vehicle to be catching fraud. So in this case, the auditors missed giant red flags. And part of it was they lived in a small town. This was a small town. Everybody knows everybody. Everybody knows everybody's business. And Rita was really cozy with the auditors. And they trusted her. So after the dust settled, Dixon was left trying to recover what it could. There was an estimated amount stolen of $53.7 million. And the funny thing is that how they actually were able to dial that in is that she kept really good records of her fraud. So when they searched her house and property, she had banker's boxes of data of what she had stolen. So that was actually pretty helpful. The FBI seized and sold off all of Rita's assets, her luxury items, her trucks, her jewelry, her horse farms, and her horses, 400 horses, bringing in about $9 million. And then the city also had insurance coverage, and that, like we heard about today. It was coverage for employee dishonesty, and through infidelity bonds, they were able to recover about $40 million through the lawsuit settlements and the insurance coverage. So the bank and the auditors that failed the city paid up big time. So Clifton Larson Allen was the accounting firm that was doing the audits. Also, as a side note, preparing Rita's personal tax returns. And so there were many ways that they should have seen how is she making this kind of money. Clifton Larson Allen, they paid $35.15 million. The bank, Fifth Third Bank, paid $3.85 million. And then another small accounting firm that had done a small amount of work for the city paid $1 million. So a recovery fund was set up and was used to finance several projects, including revitalization of River Street, repairing streets throughout the city, building new bike paths, and purchasing new vehicles and equipment for the city. This is the River Street Plaza, and it underwent significant improvements along with the development of a new pedestrian and bike path over the river. Over a historic railroad bridge that spanned the Rock River. This was all part of a riverfront master plan and contributed to transforming Dixon's riverfront area into a vibrant community space. So long needed after 20 years. So I'd like to leave you with a few questions for reflection. And so later on today, or when you have some quiet time, to really sit and think through your situation at your organization. Do you think we're too small for fraud? We're a small church, we're a small organization. Is there a culture of accountability or blind trust? Are your checks and balances real or just symbolic? Do your staff feel safe reporting suspicious activity? Who would they go to? That's the whistleblower policy that Bob was talking about. Are we relying too heavily on one person? Clearly that was the case with the city of Dixon. And what would happen if your key financial person were suddenly unavailable? The Rita Crundwell case is a powerful reminder that trust alone cannot be the foundation for internal controls. No matter how trustworthy someone seems, effective checks and balances are essential to protect God's resources. Thank you.
So I would highly recommend you all check out that documentary. And in case you think it's just going to be dry, my husband, who's in the music industry, actually watched it and liked it. So a lot of my TV viewing he doesn't like, but he thought that was a really good one. And it just talks about relying too much on trust and to really keep your eyes open. And in doing that, we can talk about frauds that happen in other charities that you might be donating to. So this is entitled Before You Donate to Another Charity. So 501c3 status requires your tax-exempt entity to know how the money donated to you is being spent, and that it's being spent for appropriate 501c3 purposes. Do you actually know when you donate money to another charity how they're spending your money? Are you monitoring that? You're required to. So the ways you can monitor how money is spent is you can look at their financial statements, for example. So both the statement of financial position, or a balance sheet, as it's called in the for-profit world, or the statement of activities, which is also called a profit and loss or income statement. It's not unreasonable to ask for that once a year, just so you can see how they're spending their money. They might have annual reports where they do an annual report. It might be on their website where they talk about how many people they served, what kinds of programs they have, those types of things. So you can read that. Photographs or project reports, for example, if you're building a church in Honduras, helping them build a church in Honduras, how are you going to monitor that that's actually what is happening with your money? Can you get photographs, project reports, or maybe a site visit if that's practical? So if you have a mission team, or maybe there's another church who's doing a mission to that particular country, maybe you can partner with them. Hey, go check out this building for us and make sure it's being used as a church. So you can get receipts from the charity if a donation was for a specific item. So if they come to you and they say, we'd like $10,000 to buy a used van, certainly they can give you a copy of the title or a copy of the receipt if the donation was for a specific item. But one of the most important things you can do is to read the IRS Form 990 if it is a charity that has to file a 990. So the 990 will give you a lot of information about the organization that you are attempting to support. So there's two places you can get a 990. The first one is irs.gov, but they are woefully behind in posting. So you might see the most recent return was from 22. They almost never have the current year up there. A better choice is ProPublica, and that's that second choice. And they are very quick at posting 990s. So just to give you kind of a time frame, if we're now just reaching the deadline for filing 2024 990s, calendar 2024. November 15th is the drop dead due date on those. So don't be too alarmed if 2024 isn't up there, but it's fair to ask the charity, have you filed your 990 yet? And they should be able to send you a copy as well if they have. But ProPublica is really a better choice for if you want to research an organization. So there's 3 kinds of 990s. The full 990 is for charities with more than $200,000 in revenue or more than $500,000 in assets. So it's an or. The 990EZ is required for charities with $50,000 of income, up to $200,000, and less than $500,000 in assets. The 990N is for the little bitty charities that have less than $50,000 in income and less than $500,000 in assets. And the 990N, frankly, is of no value. It just says, are you still operating and where your revenue is less than $50,000? Yeah, it's worthless for trying to, but it does tell you they're complying with the law if they file it. So there's that, but it's not going to give you any information. The 990 and the 990EZ tell the story of the charity, or they should. And the 990 is very comprehensive. The 990EZ a little less so, but you still can see a lot of valid information on the 990EZ. So just remember, though, that churches and church-controlled organizations don't file 990. So all other charities are required to do so, and they are required to provide you with a copy if you ask. So if somebody refuses to give you your 990, that should be a red flag. So when you're reviewing the 990, and I usually just print it out and then sit at my desk and with my red pen and mark the things I don't like. So is the form well prepared, and was it prepared by a qualified outside person, like an enrolled agent or a CPA? Is it missing information? Are there boxes left blank? It says see attached schedule, and that schedule isn't attached. IRS does little or no review of the 990s that are submitted. Is it inconsistent with what you know about the charity? For example, if the charity is telling you, we have no money, and you look at their 990 and they got $1 million in the bank, maybe that's not entirely truthful. Is the nature of the revenue consistent with the type of charity? So sometimes organizations will be almost 100% supported by donations. So example, something that helps the homeless probably is going to be supported mostly by donations, but some organizations are supported by program fees. Like if you're a school, you have tuition and fees, so most of your money comes from tuition and fees. So you want to just make sure it's consistent with what you're being told. Are the stated mission and the programs in the 990 consistent with the intent of your gift? So for example, if they don't talk about helping the homeless and you want to give them money to help the homeless, you should make sure that they actually do that. And can you understand the magnitude of the charity's work? So most charities will say, we served 4,500 people last year, we distributed 19,000 meals, something like that, so that you can see the magnitude of their impact. So, and I realize this is little, but this is where the mission is described, and it also asks if you added any new missions or you took away, or programs, added new programs or took away programs. And then it asks you to describe each program on the last part of it. And that program description requires you to report the expenses and the revenues incurred with that program. So it's helpful to know, how many people they're really helping with their programs. Are there any potential red flag comments on the return? And excess benefit transactions is one. This is either where someone was paid way too much, or someone was paid money and it wasn't reported on their W-2 or 1099. So excess benefit transactions are a big red flag. That means somebody is abusing the organization. Are there receivables from officers, directors, or key employees? In other words, are they loaning money to their officers, directors, or key employees? That's kind of a big red flag too. And are there business relationships with officers, directors, or key employees? So for example, maybe an officer owns the building they're renting, and they rent it for $1 a year. Well, that's still a related business transaction, and there's a schedule where it will tell you the nature of the transaction. So having a business relationship is not wrong. It just needs to be disclosed. And so you can make the judgment call if it's something that looks bad or is fine. You know, renting a building for $1 a year is fine. Okay, those questions are all in the 990 page 4. These are ones you want to look at, and they're the exact questions that I just went over are on the 990 page 4. So any yeses to those, you should investigate further. The other question, we were talking about how people filing 990s can't get the board right. So is the board independent? So sometimes we see charities where there's only 2 or 3 board members and they're related. So you got a family of 3 on the board. That's not an independent board. That is a bad idea. So we generally recommend 5 or more board members. It's not a hard, fast rule, but it's easier if 2 of them are related. So then you have 2 out of 5 related, as long as the other members are not related. And are the board members compensated for being on the board? Now, if they're also the executive director, obviously that person should be compensated, and that will show on the 990. So does the charity compensate its key employees fairly? So we want to look first, are the salaries not higher than what other similar organizations would pay? And conversely, are salaries unreasonably low or non-existent? I had a case this year where the executive director prided himself on never taking a salary in the 20 years. He failed to mention that just last year he stole $480,000. Okay, so, and this was a lot like the Rita Crunwell case. You know, the board, oh, well, you know, he's a musician. And I'm like, you know, musicians don't earn a lot of money. He's not supporting his lifestyle in 3 properties on his musician, and I couldn't even find him advertised anywhere. So I am also concerned if it's too low, because that fraud triangle says, you know, he's got justification for stealing money. And does it appear, are the benefits reasonable? You're required to disclose the benefits. And does it appear the board members are devoting reasonable time to the charity? The return asks how many hours per week. So if you're seeing 0, that's a problem. You know, 1 is fine if they're just a standard board member, but if they're executive director, you would expect to see 30 or 40 hours or 50 hours. So it's just, is it reasonable based on their time? So this is the officer list, and this is on the 990 page 7, and it asks you all of these questions that I just went over. It should all be there on that schedule. Okay, and when I did the 990 for this previously mentioned charity, there was a significant diversion. So that's one of the questions. Was there a significant diversion of the organization's assets? Plain language, does somebody steal from you? And it's defined as a lesser of $250,000 or 5% of gross receipts or 5% of assets. So if you have $100,000 of assets, the bar is $5,000. So significant diversion is a big deal. And these questions are on part Roman numeral 6. It asks the number of voting members and the number who are independent. Independent in this case means that they're not paid. And then, was there a significant diversion is the last line. So a yes to that requires disclosure somewhere else in the return. So you simply want to read that. Do they have basic policies in place? Conflict of interest, whistleblower, document retention, adequate compensation review policies. These are all questions that are asked on the tax return, and it's asking you if you had these policies in place. So, you know, the organization might not have them, but we always encourage our organizations that don't have them. Why do you want to answer no to that? Clearly, the IRS thinks it's important. Let's get those policies in place. Does the charity have a broad mix of revenues that are appropriate to the type of organization? So we talked about how some will have low contributions, high program fees. Some charities only have contributions. Is their investment income unduly high? So that's on a separate line. Is it unduly high? Is unrelated business income unduly high? And, all of these will be, they're subjective to some extent, but, if their unrelated business income is approaching 40 or 50%, they have a tax problem. So charities can have some unrelated business income, but it can't be their primary function. And all of those will be on part Roman numeral 8, the statement of revenue, so you can see the various kinds of revenue. And it continues because we have a lot of categories of revenue. So we're looking for rents, we're looking for gambling like bingo, we're looking for, and you may be opposed to gambling, but if they're doing gambling, it'll be here. So those are things you may want to look at. Does the balance sheet contain any unusual items? So is the cash and investment level test reasonable for the size of the charity? So I used to review 990 and tax returns for the United Way. They would ask CPAs to get together, review the financial statements. So one concern we always had is how many months or weeks of cash did they have on hand? So sometimes we'd review an organization and they had 5 days of cash. That's scary. And then sometimes they would have 5 years of cash. So do they really need a United Way grant if they have 5 years of cash on hand? Probably not. So there's a sweet spot in there, and it'll depend on the organization. But you want to make sure they have enough cash that they're not going to go broke next week, but not too much. Are there loans to officers? You want to look at that. Are accounts payable unduly high? So if they have $10,000 of cash and $80,000 of accounts payable, that might be a problem. And is the level of debt appropriate for the asset level? So if they have, a large amount of accounts payable and other accruals, you'll want to look at that. And the balance sheet is on the part 10 of the 990, and it's just broken down like a standard balance sheet. And that's the asset side. And on the liability side, we want to look at the net assets. So net assets is retained earnings, fund balance, is called a lot of different things on different reports. But if it's negative, that means the charity is spending more than it's taking in. Negative net assets are not a good thing. If they're very large, maybe the charity doesn't need your money. Could be. And if there are restricted net assets, and that does show, it breaks it down between restricted and unrestricted, is there enough cash in the bank to cover the restricted balances? So if they have restricted assets of $100,000, but there's only $50 in the bank, it's probably they've spent restricted money for operating purposes in that case. So you want to just be careful. And this is the balance sheet. It's all on one page, but obviously you'd never be able to read it if I put it on one page. Okay. And then there's a Schedule A. Is the charity's public support percentage greater than the minimum of 33%? So a low percentage can mean that the charity does not have a broad range of donors. So if it's low, closer to 33 or even below 33, that means they have a lot of large donors typically, or one very large donor. That can be dangerous in case that donor dies or decides not to support them anymore. So a higher percentage indicates that they're not dependent on a few large donors. And that is listed right here on Schedule A, Section C. So something you want to just look at. Is there a Schedule L present for transactions with interested persons? So if they have a loan to the officer, a loan from an officer or a director, or they had excess benefit transactions like the money that wasn't on the W-2. So in my case, the director didn't get a W-2, so everything that he stole was subject to excess benefit transaction rules, and so because it wasn't on the W-2. And the board had no idea So, okay, so a couple of examples where I actually went and looked at the 990. Because I looked for cases involving embezzlement, and both of these are Arizona related. So, Modest Needs Foundation, the CEO, was arrested for embezzling $2.5 million. So I pulled up the 990. First thing I see is, he prepared it himself. I'm sure he's an expert in 990 preparation. So he prepared it and signed it. So he reported the theft as grants to individuals. So he buried it in with legitimate grants. Now, the reason I know he did that is when I went to their website, they said that they generally give grants of $300 to $1,000. It's called Modest Needs Foundation, okay? Well, he reported them as grants to individuals. He wasn't smart enough to put a fake number in the number of grants, so the amount of grants was $984,000 given to 5,286 people. Well, gee, that's $18,000 per person. I mean, it's obvious what he did. That isn't modest. It doesn't agree with what the website said they give. So, sometimes people who embezzle are dumb, and it's really clear how he buried this. I mean, I didn't even have to go any further with research. I know that's where he buried it. So, the next one is Prescott Area Habitat for Humanity. The executive director, and I actually talked to the new executive director about this because they called me to do their 990 work. I said, and I had already prepared this speech, so the director who started as the finance manager was arrested for embezzling $400,000. So I pulled up the 990, and oh my goodness. They used a CPA firm, but it was not well prepared. It was terribly prepared, horribly prepared. They reported the theft as an expense called unclassified cost/adjust. Okay, so they did disclose a significant diversion, but they didn't, this one, they did not disclose a significant diversion. They just reported this unadjusted, unclassified cost/adjust. Okay, so yeah, it was pretty bad. I'm going to say an unnamed Valley charity because I did the work. So, and this is just a classic case of so many things that can go wrong. They initially called me to do an audit. The treasurer called me and said, hey, we'd like to have an audit done. Great. What bookkeeping system do you use? I don't know. Can you have your bookkeeper call me? Sure. I wanted to know bookkeeping system, payroll system, whatever. I said, so bookkeeper, what accounting software do you use? Oh, I don't use any. This is a $14 million organization. I said, well, how did you fill out the 990? She self-prepared it. It was bad. She said, I just take the bank statements. They had 9 bank accounts, and I run an adding machine tape. And that's how I do the 990. I was okay then. So called the treasurer back and said, hey, you don't have books. We need to get you set up on QuickBooks. So let's get you set up on, we did QuickBooks Online, got them the subscription, for virtually free, and then proceeded to enter 1 month's worth of transactions. I said, I won't do a 990, never mind an audit. You don't have any books. So first thing we got to do is get books for the year you need the 990 done. So we set up the books. I processed everything, and they got a lot going on. I processed everything for 1 month. And I was like, something's not jiving here. What was happening is the cash that they took in never made it to the bank. And so, and I could see that because they had Square reports that they were running things through Square, but the cash never made it to the bank. So, long story short, the first year, $480,000 in the year I did. And this is a charity that some of you are supporting. I know for a fact. So I would suggest, and it is up on ProPublica, I can't tell you the name, but I prepared it, so if you see that, you should be checking these. So when I did the return, I disclosed the significant diversion. I disclosed the excess benefit transaction. I disclosed that they had no policies. I disclosed that they had a significant receivable from the executive director, who is an officer. He's also board president. Thank you. So it honestly, it broke my heart, because this is an organization that a number of you are supporting, I know for a fact, and the director is treating it like his own personal piggy bank. I went to the board. They stalled is the best word I can use. This individual has his entire family. There's like 12 people in his family working for the organization. So it's just, it made me physically ill to see this. So keep your eyes open and review the Form 990. If it's somebody who files a 990, it shouldn't take you long if you use these checklists here. Okay, here's what I'm looking at, and it just shouldn't take you long. And be sure you know how your money's being spent. Because one of my church clients I know sent them $90,000 in that particular year. And I just really feel like you should review things. Okay? It happens. So, okay. So we have a new One Big Beautiful Bill. It's not beautiful in a lot of ways, but we're going to go with the One Big Beautiful Bill. So it was signed into law July 4th, and you have to be careful with this because some of the provisions are retroactive, some are for future years. It ends some programs, like it ends solar, but not for a while. It creates other programs, and it expands some programs, and it restricts other programs. So like depreciation was expanded, but yet other programs were restricted. So just be aware, and if you're searching provisions of the One Big Beautiful Bill, just be sure you're searching the final one because it went through a lot of steps to get to where it is. So what is not in the bill that was going to be in the bill, much to my dismay, was the parking lot tax. Do you all remember that from a few years back where they wanted to charge employers who allowed their employees to park free in the parking lot? So the final version eliminated the parking lot tax, thank goodness. Okay, how many of you have coffee shops? Okay. So this information is important if you have tipped employees. So I know that we have some large coffee shops in my tax practice. So tipped employees, this is effective at the beginning of this year, so 1/1/25. They get a deduction for their tips of up to $25,000. They don't have to itemize to take that deduction, but it doesn't change your reporting for the 941 or the employer taxes. So it doesn't change payroll. What you need to make sure is that if you have employees who are tipped, and this has always been the rule, you have to report those tips separately as tips. Okay, you can't just add them to wages. You have to report them under a separate category because they go on the W-2 in a separate box. So if you do have tipped employees and you haven't been doing it right, please go fix it for 25. It doesn't have a lot of impact for 24 and prior, but for 25 it does have impact. So you are required to report those in your payroll separately. So overtime pay, this is also effective 1/1/25. So employees who receive overtime pay that is required by the Fair Labor Standards Act, and that is important because it has to be required by the Act, receive a deduction for the halftime portion. So if you pay time and a half, All we're talking about here is the half portion. So the first part is just regular wages. The second part is the half-time provision. They're not required to itemize. The employer taxes don't change. But you must track it in your payroll software because it has to be reported on the W-2 form. So if you have not adequately reported that, you need to go back to 1/1/25. You don't need to amend any returns. You just need to fix the payroll so the W-2s will be right. Does that make sense? Okay. So this is the W-2 form. And so I'm going to just point out here where we're talking about this. Box 12A says TP, qualified tips. Okay, so you are going to report your qualified tips with a code of TP. The qualified overtime is going to be reported as TT, qualified overtime. You'll notice this is a 2026 W-2. IRS is not amending the 25 W-2. Okay, so it's going to look just like 24. The only difference is this 14B. So you have to tell what occupation they received those tips in. So, people like musicians, bartenders, wait staff, anybody who gets tips will have a code for their occupation. So if you have a coffee shop, it's restaurant. You're basically just restaurant. So, but that box will not be on the 2025, but it will be on the 2026. So for those of you who use payroll services, you're going to want to find out, how do I address this overtime in your system, this halftime provision, and how do I address tips if that's applicable to you? So 25, the only thing different you have to do is the TP or the TT, but in 26, you also have to give that code for restaurant employees or whoever else gets tips. So it has to be an occupation that normally gets tips. So if my client, and occasionally I get tips. I don't. It's like occasionally a client will say, here's a gift card to take your staff out to lunch. I'm not a tipped employee. I'm not in that category because tips don't occur regularly. So if you're in a profession where you have tips, in 26 you'll have to report that. 25 you do not. Okay, effective 1/1/26. So this one's effective for next year. Non-itemizers will be able to allow deductions of up to 1,000 single, 2,000 for charitable contributions. So that means you don't have to itemize, and you can deduct $2,000 of your church contributions. So that's a benefit for sure. High-income donors are going to get a haircut, though. So super high-income donors, we're talking people, $600,000 or so. It depends if they're married or single. They'll see less tax savings by donating because if they're in the 37% bracket, they can only save 35%. So they're getting a 2% haircut if they're in that high bracket. And only donations that exceed half of 1% of adjusted gross income. So if they give you $100,000, you're going to back off that they're going to back off that half of 1%. You guys don't do anything different. You guys just send your statement out. The tax preparer and the software do this. But I just want to let you know that there's going to be less impact to those high-income donors and more impact, most likely, to the low-income donors. So better impact for low income. So donors older than 70 and a half, if they're in that high income bracket, then they definitely want to donate through their IRAs. This is an opportunity for you to push IRA donations. There are so many benefits if you're 70 and a half to donating through your IRA. So if you're not familiar with this and if your church isn't promoting it, I highly recommend you offer people the opportunity to donate through their IRA. So this is another benefit that it's just going to affect people at the individual level, but it could indirectly impact how much people are giving. So what was happening prior is your property taxes, auto tags, state income tax, etc. The biggest deduction you could get was $10,000. And so somebody in even a moderately high income would hit this limit, and it would keep them from itemizing. So they couldn't itemize deductions because not all of that was deductible. So more people will be itemizing under this new structure, which raises it to $40,000. Here in Arizona, $40,000 is super generous. If you live in New Jersey or New York or Michigan, that's a lot less because property taxes are so high. That's a lot less effective. But here, it's really going to be effective to allowing more people to itemize. So if you personally think, well, I can never itemize, you may want to look at itemizing again this year because of that cap. So that will make the donations more valuable because you can deduct more of your state and local income tax. Okay. 1099s and miscellaneous and NEC. Now, I need you to repeat what year this is for. Okay, what year is this for? What are we going to do for 2025? Same thing, right? Same thing we've done for 50 years. So I think that $600 has been the same as long as I've been in practice, which it's not quite 50 years, but it's 40 plus years. So it's been $600. So starting in 26 that you file in 27, they are changing the filing requirement from 600 to 2,000. Yay, can we all? Yeah. Because $600 anymore is kind of peanuts. And it will adjust for inflation automatically. So we won't have to spend 40 years with it being $2,000. So it's going to adjust for inflation. So next year it might be 21, or year after it might be 2,100. Please, please, please pay attention to the dates on this. So you're going to do same old this year, and then next year you're going to, adjust it. So it's going to likely result in a lot fewer filings. I mean, that those people between 600 and 2,000 are going to go up. And I bet we're not going to pay people $599 anymore. I know what you do. I know what you do. So just remember, though, what year these are, because this bill is really confusing with the implementation dates. So does anybody have employee retention credits still outstanding? I have a couple. Okay. I'm hoping this is last year I talk about employee retention credit, but so if you did not file by January 31st of 2024 for quarter 3, then you're out of luck. So if you filed it in February of 2024, you're not going to get your money. So you need to look at those filing dates. And IRS, unfortunately, has lost forms. They've duplicated forms. They've made decisions that are not valid. I've got one under protest now, or under appeal, I should say. So, those are still valid because they were filed prior. But if you haven't received it yet, you need to look at what the filing date was. But they are still processing. I had a call a couple weeks ago on my one case. Okay, moving expense reimbursements. Churches are massive violators of this thing. It's been law since 18, okay? And I've said it many times that moving expense reimbursements are taxable. So this was a temporary provision that was going to expire in 2025. In other words, it would revert back to old law, which was you could reimburse employees for moving expenses. That is not the case. It's made permanent. It's gone forever unless somebody changes it. So moving expense reimbursements are taxable. And I see this every year. Every single year I see some church writing a check to reimburse an employee for moving expenses. So you can only reimburse it on a taxable basis. There's a new thing that's coming out, a new scholarship granting organization. This is a new type of nonprofit organization that'll be effective 1/1/27. So this is down the road. So how many of you are familiar with the STO program here in Arizona? Brett's got his hand high. Arizona Tuition Organization back there, folks. So this is, where you can take a state deduction. One of the problems with this program is Our state rate is 2.5%. So it's really, it used to be, in the 6%. So the state program, a lot of people don't have enough tax to do the maximum. So this is a new federal scholarship granting organization where the organization can accept contributions and a donor can receive a dollar for dollar federal tax credit of up to $1,700 single, $3,400 married. So the numbers are good because most people have that amount of federal tax. You can't double dip. You can't do a donation and take a state credit and then also take a federal credit on the same money. You can make two separate donations, but you cannot double dip by any state tax credit. One of the differences, there are actual income limitations for the federal program. The state program says they have to demonstrate financial need, but there's not specific guidance or dollar limits on that. So that's one of the big differences. Here's the caveat. And Brett and I have had long conversations about whether we think Arizona is going to do this. So the state must agree to participate. So there's a question, will it be folded? Well, will our governor approve it is number one, right, Brett? And whether it would somehow be folded into existing STOs, they would manage both a federal program and a state program. So we don't know the answers to any of these questions, whether Arizona is going to participate. It is up to the state has to agree, and I'm sure there will be caveats with that. So it will benefit more taxpayers at the federal level due to the Arizona's low rates. So we hope we can do both of them. It'd be nice to be able to do both credits because the local STO community serves a broader band of students than these will. So, okay, and I'm sure you've all heard about this, is the Medicaid restrictions. So this will be effective 1/1/26, but it really comes into play as people are signing up for healthcare.gov. So there will be Medicaid restrictions based on working and based on different things. Medicaid in Arizona is called Access. So when people talk about Medicaid, that's the Access program here in Arizona. And I've had this happen so many times when I'm doing a tax return is a family will have applied for a subsidy. And what happens when you apply for a subsidy is you have to then reconcile it on the tax return. So you could get more subsidy with your taxes or you could pay back subsidy with your taxes. But I've seen numerous cases where they're too poor for a federal subsidy, but they're too rich to get Medicaid. And so they get no subsidy. And this is common in bigger families. It's common with pastoral clients. I had one pastoral client, I just did her return, and I told her to forego her housing allowance because she would have paid back $13,000 next year of subsidy. She qualified for it this year. And I said, because they don't count housing allowance in the income designation. So I said, cut your housing allowance to like $6,000 a year, and that'll take care of it. So that's what we're doing. Because she was in that case where she was too poor for a subsidy on the federal return, but too rich to get Medicaid because of her housing allowance. So they count different kinds of income. So just be aware if you have your employees who are on the healthcare, healthcare.gov, it's going to be a rude awakening, and sign up is coming soon. So there will be reductions in the amount of the subsidy. And in past years, there was a cap of how much you had to repay. Like this pastor I just did, she didn't have to pay the full $13,000. She only had to pay $375 of it back. Next year, it's going to be $13,000 if she continues on this path. So you may see benevolence requests increasing. You need to look at your employees that you've directed to go to the healthcare.gov and make sure that they are aware. It's hard to avoid it in the news, but not everybody recognizes exactly what it means. The Medicaid restrictions or the subsidies. The subsidies are being adjusted. So just to make you aware of that. Okay, our next speaker is Barb Starley. Barb is the CPA here in town, and she is going to talk to you about payroll. And let me just say one thing about payroll. Can I just say it? You guys have all heard me talk about Ministry Works payroll, right? Every year I say go to Ministry Works. They are here known as Brotherhood Works. They were always part of the Brotherhood Insurance Company. So we have Brotherhood Works here in the house today. So if you've been curious about the services they offer that I've promoted over the last number of years, I love them. They always get it right. I've never had an issue with their payroll. So I don't even do my own payroll. Can I just say that? I don't do my own payroll. I use a service. But Barb's going to talk about how to look at your payroll, see if it's compliant, and give you some practical tools for it.
Okay, hello everybody. Can everybody hear me okay? Yeah? Okay. All right. So when Monica asked me to speak about payroll compliance, I was like, how do I not make this boring, right? So what I thought I would do is if you came to me and said, how does our payroll look? Are we doing things right? These are the things that I would do. These are the things that I would have you do, okay? And so, I just thought it might be better to look at it as if it's a self-audit checklist. So what are you going to do to make sure that you're payroll compliant? There are 5 main reports that you want to be looking at. The statement of financial position, also known as a balance sheet. The statement of activity, also known as a profit and loss. Your payroll journal, summary, or register, depending on what your payroll service company calls it. I'm going to want to look at previous year's W-2s and also previous year 1099s, both NECs and miscellaneous. So those are the things that I would just say, could you have those ready for me if I was going to audit your books? So what should you be looking for? On the statement of financial position, you should be looking for, first of all, your payroll liability accounts. They shouldn't be negative, which means that you have overpaid them. You should be looking for that the taxes are being paid. If you're using a service, they're going to do that for you. You shouldn't have a balance in there because most payroll services will not only pay your people, but they'll pay your taxes as well. And if you've recorded your payroll properly, that number is generally 0. What doesn't always get paid by the payroll service are garnishments and retirement contributions. So you want to be looking at those and making sure that those payments are being made because that's almost always something that you need to do. I'm also going to look on the statement of financial position for employee advances. So often I will see churches, or, the volunteer bookkeeper. She's like, well, I know they bought supplies, but they really weren't the church's supplies, but I'm still posted it to office supplies, and when they give me my money back, then I'll credit office supplies. I go, no. That money is owed to the church. It needs to be on the statement of financial position as an other current asset, as an employee advance. It should be up to date. You should know who owes you, how much they owe you, and when you expect to be paid back. And if the repayment is not immediate, like tomorrow, then, or at least over the next pay period, you want to get that repayment in writing. So I had a church recently where the pastor's wife accidentally started her Starbucks $25 per month renewal on the pastor's credit card. And it was about, I think about 14 months before they caught it. And I mean, she was, just mortified that she had used her wrong card, but it came up because somebody was paying attention, right? So we moved that expense off of the youth minister's budget line, which is where it was landing, and put it into employee advances to remind us. We want to leave clues. Our reports should reflect what's really happening in our church. And then I do want to mention this because I've seen it more recently with key person insurance. This is not life insurance that you give to all of your employees as a benefit. This is the church owns the policy. The church is the beneficiary, and they're buying life insurance on that key person, usually the head or lead pastor. And so if that policy happens to be a whole life policy, there's usually some cash surrender value. And that should be treated like almost like an investment. That money is available to you. You can actually take loans off of that money, but you want to make sure that that is recorded so that it's not just some hidden thing that is off to the side and no one knows that a loan has been taken off. I'm also looking for discretionary funds. Discretionary funds are those monies that you say, hey, the deacon or the pastor or someone has discretion over how they spend it, but we want to make sure that it's also accountable, because if it's not accountable, it's taxable. Then I would move to the statement of activity. I want to look at personnel. I want that to be a big header on my statement of activity, and then 3 main subheaders, if you will, under that category. I want compensation, benefits, and other payroll-related costs. This is really important because your words matter. When you're talking about personnel, you're talking about employees, not independent contractors. Independent contractors should not be shown under personnel. They are not personnel, they're independent contractors. Probably the biggest, I guess, my pet peeve would be when people say, well, they're a 1099 employee. They are not a 1099 employee. They are either a W-2 employee or they are a 1099 non-employee, but they're also not personnel. They are not, if you were to be audited by the state or the federal and they saw your independent contractors, they would go, well, you think they're employees? Why aren't you paying them that way? Okay, so be really careful about that. I want clergy and non-clergy separated, but not necessarily separating the clergy salary and the housing. I don't need to see that. I want to know how much the clergy is being paid and how much the non-clergy is being paid. The reason for that is I had one church that was paying their clergy a certain amount of what they called salary, and then their housing separate. Well, the clergy moved, and so they increased the housing. And pretty soon, that $60,000 a year pastor was making over $90,000 because they never adjusted his salary. So we want to look at your pastor compensation like a pie. You have so much compensation, and it's just how big is that piece of pie related to housing. So that's why I don't want to see that separated. Benefits. I want to be looking at the benefits in terms of what's taxable and the benefits. Remember, this is statement of activity. This is the church's expenses. So health insurance should be the net amount that is the church's expense. So if the church says, I'm going to pay 100% of all of our employees, however, I'm going to have my employees pay for 50% of their kids' coverage or 50% of their spouse coverage, I want to see that netted against that health insurance expense. Payroll taxes should be the employer portion only. So if I'm looking at the compensation and then I see payroll taxes at 35%, probably the payroll's recorded wrong, right? Because the compensation should be a gross, and your taxes should be only the employer portion, which is generally just your Social Security and Medicare on non-clergy people, which is, again, why I want to separate that. It's going to be really easy to make that computation. Retirement plan, same thing. It's only the employer contribution that is an expense of the church. And I also want to see work comp insurance. So some people will put work comp under other payroll-related costs, but to me that is a benefit, right? If they get hurt on the job, they're going to have a benefit of, not taxable, but they're going to have a benefit of having that. I don't really care. If you want to put it in other payroll-related costs, I'm not going to split hairs on that. But other payroll-related costs should be background checks. And again, if you have a key person policy, that expense should be as part of your personnel costs. Okay, the next thing that and I know I'm going really fast, I realize that I have about 2.5 hours worth of stuff that I need to finish in 20 minutes, so here we go. Your payroll journal, it might be called a payroll register, it might be called a payroll summary. I'm looking at the entire report. First of all, but the first thing I'm going to look at is payroll taxes. I should not see any federal unemployment taxes under the employer taxes section. If I do, you do not need to, churches and ministries do not need to pay federal unemployment tax. So you're probably entitled to a refund, first of all. Second of all, you should probably talk to your payroll company because they should know that also. Or go over to Brotherhood Works because I know they know that. In the churches should also not have any Arizona unemployment. And I do give you some exceptions for your ministries. So there is an exception if the church says, I want to voluntarily pay into the state unemployment. That's an option. Nonprofits with greater than 4 employees, they do need to be paying into the Arizona unemployment. There is an exception and an election that you can do that you can say, well, I want to just do a reimbursement if someone claims unemployment. Key thing here, though, your employee handbook should probably indicate that they're not covered, right, by unemployment. So, and you might keep that in mind if you decide that you would want to do some kind of a severance, because they won't have that available, because you're not paying in, right? Clergy payroll, again. The next thing I do on the payroll journal, I'm going to look at the clergy. I should see salary and housing separated on the payroll journal, not in the statement of activity, but on the payroll journal. I should see no Social Security or Medicare taxes withheld or matched on clergy, okay? This is a case, and I know you probably, most of you know this, this is a case of the IRS giveth and the IRS taketh away. The IRS says the housing is, the housing allowance is not taxable for federal income tax, but the pastor then is needing to pay his Social Security, including on the housing allowance, through SECA. Okay, so really important that you don't have any of that matched. And then federal and state taxes for a clergy are not mandatory, but they can be withheld. So I'm not going to say, oh, you can't have it withheld. Many pastors are opting now to have taxes withheld to cover that SECA tax, as well as their federal income tax and state income tax. And that's a good thing for them, right? They don't have to worry about the 4 quarters that have these weird dates, right? They can just do little by little, just like all the other employees. They just can't have it coming out as Social Security and Medicare. It comes out as federal withholding to cover those taxes. Then we move on to, in the journal, I'm going to look at the non-clergy employees. I want to see the compensation shown as salary only for exempt employees. That's my preference. And I want, in that vein, I want to confirm that the job duties align with the Department of Labor work test. Are they executive, admin, or professional? I'm going to confirm also that their salary meets that FLSA threshold, that's $684 per week or $35,568 per year. And the nice thing, if you keep your salaried people only for the exempt, then you're not even thinking, oh wait, they may have gone over and now I have to pay, because there is such a thing, just by the way, there is such a thing as a salaried non-exempt employee, right, if they don't meet those other tests. So if you just make the other people hourly, it makes it a lot easier to know who's exempt and who's not exempt. For the compensation that are hourly, there's no such thing as really as a part-time salaried person, right? The assumption is that a salaried person is 40 hours per week. So if you have people that are making less than that minimum Federal Labor Standards Act threshold, my recommendation is make them hourly and put the hours in as what you expect them to work. You might go, I don't want them to have to do it. You know, I know sometimes they're going to work 18 hours and sometimes they're going to work 22 hours, but can I just do it 20 hours a week? Well, you can, but just know that there is a chance that they'll come back and say, well, you only pay me for 20 hours a week, but I've been working regularly 24. So just make sure that you are fair with them, and most people stay within that limit. The other thing is, if you're going to pay a flat amount, it should be based on hourly, because you need to make sure that it is meeting the minimum amount. So I know churches that have paid some of their administrative people, and they're like, we just want you to work 28 hours. That's now below what they need to cover you for some of the benefits, right? And then, but they're there like 36, 38, 40 hours working. That's not right either. So by putting it on their paycheck as an hourly, they're seeing what you expect from them. So that was my recommendation on that. Just make sure, and I always want to make sure that the state minimum wage is being met. Right now, that's $14.70 an hour. And that the city, if it's greater than the state, like Flagstaff, is at $17.85 per hour. I want to make sure that I am meeting that expectation as well. The next thing I look at on the payroll journal, taxable benefits. I want to make sure that that any taxable benefit that's showing up on the journal, things that they're getting paid for in addition to their compensation, things like health insurance, maybe they have a health insurance allowance. If you're paying for personal health insurance without an ICHRA account, and when I say ICHRA, I-C-H-R-A, plan, it needs to be in writing and it needs to be effective, and people need to sign up for it, and that all needs to be in writing. But just keep in mind that personal health insurance could be, somebody says, well, I don't really need health insurance from the church. I've gotten old enough. I'm on Medicare now. How about you just give me my, reimburse me for my Medicare premium? That's taxable income to them unless you have an ICHRA. Health sharing premiums like MediShare, those are considered personal plans, even if everybody signs up as a group. So you need to be careful about that. Reimbursed FICA or a SICA allowance is taxable. It's additional income to them. It should be part of compensation. And then any non-accountable allowance are taxable. So auto allowances, if you're fully paying someone's cell phone bill for like $300 a month, that's not paying for just a portion of their service. You're paying for the phone, right? And then any discretionary funds that are not accountable. So be careful about that as well. And then the other thing I'm going to be looking for on that payroll journal are paid time off accruals. So there's strict rules on that. There's some mandated paid sick leave, and I'm not going to go into all of it, but there's some really good information on here. Who needs to get paid time off accruals? But I should be seeing that, your employee should be seeing that on their paycheck, and you should be having some way to track when they use it, okay? Just to kind of get through a little bit of this. So let's see. And what's interesting about the paid time off, I thought this was interesting too, is that paid time off can be used for the employee's own medical care, to care for a family member, when an employee is exposed to a communicable disease, or for situations involving domestic violence, sexual violence, abuse, or stalking. So just know that they don't have to like bring in a doctor's order, that these other things are covered by paid time off sick leave. Then just kind of, again, moving on quickly into the other things I'm going to look for. I want to make sure that I'm going to look at your prior year W-2s. Your clergy, box 1 should have the compensation, any taxable benefits should be in box 1. Non-clergy compensation plus taxable benefits would be in box 1 as well. Box 2, federal income tax withheld from paychecks. Again, federal income tax is not mandatory from clergy, but clergy can request to have additional money withheld. So you want to put that in box 2. Box 3, 4, 5, and 6 for clergy should be 0. There should be nothing or blank. There should be nothing in there for Social Security, Social Security wages or Medicare wages, or Social Security taxes or Medicare taxes. But non-clergy, those are going to be all filled up. Box 12 is where you're going to see things like the retirement plans and those types of things. Box 14 should have the housing allowance in there. The clergy housing portion of their housing allowance should show up in box 14 because they need to check, the clergy needs to check and make sure that their actual expenses I should say that the housing allowance doesn't exceed their actual expenses, because if you give them more than their actual expenses, that's taxable. They have to report that on their personal returns. So you want to make sure that that's in box 14. The state section is generally the same as boxes 1 and 2. And then just really quickly, prior year 1099s, I'm looking for people that maybe aren't really 1099 people. Like, I'm sure you all are perfect with that. But you want to make sure that you are considering your control. Like, how much control do you have? Do you tell them what they're going to get paid, when to show up? You give them the tools to do their job, including audio-visual, if they're music people. And how much of their service are integrated into the organization's purpose. Those are all key indicators of that they are really not 1099 people. They are probably actually they're probably actually employees. And then finally, I do want to look at the 1099 miscellaneous, especially if you have fantastic musicians or pastors that are writing books. There might be royalties involved. And almost always you should have, if you're renting, you're going to have a landlord. You're going to have a 1099 miscellaneous for the landlord. You should have a W-9 on file. I should be able to go in and see that all of your vendors that perform services have a W-9 on file, so you can easily do that. And then the other things that I'm looking for, I'm going to look at your job descriptions, your employee handbook, your housing allowance worksheets, your board minutes, and your employee records. So those are all just things to keep in mind as far as documentation. And then I'm not going to go any further with that, because I think it's just kind of a checklist of, do you have these things and what do they say? And are you being consistent with what you are saying in your board minutes or your job descriptions with what's actually happening? With that, I'm going to turn it back to Monica.
I love your tennis shoes, Barb. Did you want to see? Accountant. I love those. Okay, we're going to get through 2 more modules, and then we'll have all the vendors come up, and we'll answer some questions, and we'll do a drawing for door prizes. So if you have not put your ticket into the vendors' red buckets, now is your last chance to do that, and then we'll be drawing for door prizes. So, okay. So we have some changes with federal and state electronic payments that you all need to be aware of. So effective there's a presidential order dated March of 2025 for payments effective 9/30/25. Now, this is both business and individual. However, they haven't released the rules yet on individual payments, but businesses are in full effect now. You cannot write a check for tax payments any longer. So maybe some of you are tiny churches, you're sending a check in with your 941 once a quarter. That's not allowed anymore. You have to use electronic payments. This also includes notices that you might get. So say you screwed up your 941 deposits and you got a penalty notice, you have to pay that electronically now. The same token, IRS is not going to send checks anymore. They're going to use ACH or wire transfer or something. So you want to be careful. They're going to announce the individuals, so when you go to file your return in March or April, there may be rules at that point. We don't know. With this government shutdown, who knows what's going to happen, but just keep your ears open for that. Okay, so all government agencies are moving to require ID.me, and you heard me talk about that in the solar energy. How many of you have an ID.me account? Okay, a lot of you do. So ID.me is assigned to an individual, not to a company. So it's identifying you as the individual. So you can use it both for business and personal activities. So when I'm accessing IRS for a client's account, I use my business email login. And when I'm accessing Medicare, for example, for personal, I use my personal email. It's all tied to the same ID.me. So you can use multiple email addresses. It identifies me as an individual. And you have to set this up in advance, and you have to upload personally identifying information like a driver's license, and there's a few other things. This is not something you do quickly, so it can take some time. Usually it goes through within a day or two, but it can take time. I do recommend that if you do not have an ID.me account yet, that you just get one, because you are going to be able to do nothing with a government agency without one. Everyone's moving to ID.me. So if you don't have one, and it's literally, that's the website, ID.me. And you can sign up, and sign up online is free. So, okay, so the approved methods for paying your taxes are you can use the IRS Direct Pay. The good news is it's free. You don't have to sign in. You don't need to have an account. You must use a bank account with it. And if you make a mistake, like you key in $10,000 when you meant to key in $1,000, you can change it or cancel it within 2 days. And we've given you the direct pay link there. This is just for business payments. You can use EFTPS, and this is what most of your payroll services are using is EFTPS. It's going to become the TC2 program at some point. So don't be alarmed if you see TC2, that's the old EFTPS. This is also free. However, you have to enroll in advance. And what you do is you enroll and they snail mail you a PIN. And I cannot tell you how many times clients don't get their PINs, over and over and over. So I would recommend if you're going to use EFTPS, you need to do it well in advance. And if you call them and say, I didn't get my PIN, they generally say, we'll mail you another one. I had one client that went through 4 times. We never did figure out where his PIN was going. You must use a bank account to pay EFTPS, and you can change or cancel up to 2 days before the scheduled payment. So that's EFTPS. It's primarily used for your payroll taxes. So you can do electronic funds withdrawals. So this is like you come to me, I prepare your tax return, I say, you owe $2,000, we can file it and have it withdrawn for you on April 15th. So this is done through an e-file preparer, and you have to use a bank account, and there are no changes. If I hit that button and submit it, we're done. They're going to take your money. So, but it is a good way to pay your personal income taxes. There is same-day wire. Generally, people don't use this unless they have a giant payment that needs to be paid on the due date. In other words, I waited till October 15th, and I haven't paid my taxes, and I can do same-day wire. There's no charges other than what the bank would charge you. You have to download a form. You have to take it to the bank. It's kind of a pain in the neck. But it's a procrastinator problem, not not for most of us. So, okay, you must e-file W-2 and 1099 forms if your business has 10 or more total information returns. So you add up the number of W-2s, the number of 1099s, and actually the 990 is an information return too. So you add that up, and if that's 10 or more, everything has to be e-filed. So this rule was actually effective in 2023, and I still see people violating it. Has anybody gotten a notice on that at all, ever? I've not seen one yet, so not sure if they're counting. All the 990s have to be e-filed. There is no provision for paper filing a 990. Okay, Arizona has its own rules. So you must make electronic payments when your annual liability exceeds $500. I don't see a lot of notices on this either, but your transaction privilege tax, this is your sales tax report if you have one, withholding for employees, if you have corporate unrelated business income tax. Once you meet that $500, all payments have to be filed electronically. So you can sign up at aztaxes.gov. You have to enroll in advance. And how many have been through this pain in the neck process? Yes, it's a terrible pain in the neck because the application form does not deal with nonprofits well. So, yes, you have to list all the officers and their social security numbers. I generally tell people list 2, just give them something. But it's just not, they don't distinguish between owners and officers. You have to list at least somebody on there with a social security number. It can take forever to have it approved sometimes. It's really, it's not easy. You can pay by a bank withdrawal or a credit card, and there will be a fee for the credit card. And you can also file online at aztaxes.gov. But you have to be set up first. Can't wait till January 31st and do it. Okay, so forms that must be e-filed for Arizona is W-2 forms. Withholding, if your average quarterly liability was $125 per more for the prior year, transaction privilege tax, and 1099 forms need to be filed with the state, but only if there is state withholding, which I never see, except for like gambling. Sometimes we'll have some state withholding, like gambling forms, but rarely do you have withholding on a 1099 at the church level. Did some of you get letters this summer reminding you to check that your payroll service is actually paying your taxes on EFTPS? I saw a couple of them. Anybody get those letters? Yeah. So that's just reminding you that when you, quote, pay your payroll taxes, you're actually paying the payroll service. Then the payroll service turns around and transmits to EFTPS. Now, there have been cases where, surprise, surprise, the payroll service did not pay the taxes. You're still liable, even though you paid the payroll company. So periodically, it's probably good to log into EFTPS and just make sure your payroll taxes are actually being paid. I haven't heard a case lately, but so those letters were just reminding you that you still remain liable until that tax is paid. Okay, this will be the last module we'll cover, the 720 filing requirements. How many of you file a 720? Do you even, got a few that, okay. Probably a lot more of you should be filing a 720. So churches are not exempt. So this is the thing that covers excise taxes on like tires and firearms and tobacco, but it also covers patient-centered outcomes research institute fees, okay? This has to do with health insurance. So this fee actually went into place 2012, but with more and more people doing different, it used to be standard, you just did a group insurance plan and called it good. But with more and more people using the individual coverage HRAs or other kinds of HRAs or reimbursing Medicare, these kinds of things need, the 720 comes into play. So this fee applies if you have a health reimbursement arrangement, HRA, if you have a qualified small employer HRA, the QSE HRA, or the ICRA, the individual coverage HRA. So if you have any of those plans or a non-plan, if you have a non-plan, you need to have one of those plans. So if you're reimbursing any health insurance, you need one of those plans. So if you have any of these plans, then you're liable for filing the 720. These plans are not included. So group insurance plans. So if you have a standard group plan, your group is paying this fee. Standalone dental and vision. If you have Delta Dental, you have that, just maybe you only offer dental and vision. I've seen churches that do that. That's fine. You don't have to pay the fee on those. If you have health savings accounts, the HSAs, savings accounts, those are not considered reportable plans. Or if you have the flexible spending accounts, those are not considered these plans. So basically you've got certain, if you're doing premium reimbursements that are full group insurance, that's the issue. So the fee is based on the plan year. So the fee for the plan year 10/1/24 to 9/30/25 is, if is $3.47 times the average number of lives covered under the plan. So there's different ways of calculating the average. I'm not going to go into that. The form has instructions, but so if you have 10 employees, then you owe $34.70. So it's not a huge burden. The form is filed, this is a quarterly form, but you only file it once a year for this purpose. You file the second quarter, ending 6/30, is due 7/31. So you report the entire year, wherever your plan year falls. When you get a new plan or when your plan year falls, so if it falls in that year, July 1 to 6/30, that's what you report. You file it one time. It says quarterly, but you don't need to file it. You just do one time for the second quarter. So there's 8 pages to this form. It's ridiculous, and you're going to fill out about 3 lines. So you're going to complete, name, address, all that stuff. And then in part 3, you're going to fill in the form. There are penalties and interest for late payment, so the maximum penalty is the lesser of $510 or 100% of the tax. So if you're filing late and you owed $34.70, then your penalty will be $34.70. Okay, this is what the form looks like, and these are literally the only lines you fill out. I-33, or 133, I guess it is, 133. So literally, these are the only lines out of those 8 pages you fill out. And it's the average number of employees times the rate. The rate changes mid-year, and it goes by when your plan year ends. So if it ends, say it ends November, you're going to do a different rate than if it ends in September. If you did not file it by July 31st, I recommend you do so now. And you should consider filing all the late returns if your church has had requirements in those years. There's no statute of limitations for an unfiled return. IRS generally says, file 7 years, but, I haven't seen specific guidance on this. So, okay, we are not going to cover this last module because we're out of time, but I would like our vendors to all come up, bring your red buckets. I'm going to answer a couple questions here. Okay, this one is, we have hourly staff coach sports, paying with a stipend. Do we need now to pay the stipends as hourly work, possibly with overtime since they are over 40 hours? Yes. Yes, if you have employees who are working more than 40 hours, even if it's in 2 different jobs, yes, they need to be paid hourly and they need to be overtime if appropriate. Okay, does the list of officers for the 990 correspond to fiscal calendar or the board's annual meeting when officers are elected? It goes by whatever filing period you are filing for. So if you're filing a June 30th year end, it's July 1 through June 30th, whoever is on the board. So anybody who was on the board last year most likely will be on the board this year because they generally don't leave exactly on June 30th. So the list is, the compensation is based on the prior calendar year. So, but you have to list everybody who served on the board anytime. Yeah, there's a little bit more. So yeah, wages are calendar year, but people that are listed based on serving during the fiscal year. How much authority should be given to the senior pastor? Is Bob still down there? Well, this is where you read your bylaws, folks. Okay, read your bylaws. That's how much authority is given to your senior pastor. So read your articles and bylaws and go from there. Bob, do you want to comment? You can come up here and use the microphone if you want. Okay, what is the best way to communicate financial decisions, resolutions to the accounting department? This is a very good question because sometimes the accounting department is the last to know. I was sitting in the pew listening to someone talk about a foundation as finance chair that I didn't even know we had. You know, so things need to be communicated, and both Nancy and Julie has served at churches, so ideally they should get a copy of the board minutes each and every time because there are things that are going to impact them. How many of you get board minutes? Not very many. It's hard to do things right when you don't know what's going on. So, yes. Okay. What do you advise a small church who the bank isn't willing to issue a credit card without using a person as the liability signer? It doesn't matter if you're small or big. They're most likely going to require someone to sign for personal liability to use a credit card. So it's more common. You can manage that risk for the employee by setting a low credit limit. It doesn't need to be $20,000. Maybe $4,000 is adequate. So unfortunately, that's the way of the world, and that's all we can do. So, okay, let's have our vendors come up. Okay, you got one more? Okay. Okay, so I'm going to draw for our big exciting prize, which I'm sure you all know what it is because it's the same every year, and that's the Church and Ministry Tax Guide. Best book ever, best $50 you'll ever spend. So it is, isn't it? It is amazing. It's easy to read. It gives you all your answers. So that, and we are setting a rule this year that if you win one time, then we're going to skip you if you get drawn again. Somebody made that suggestion. I thought, that's a great idea. Jared Nichols. If you can't sleep at night, chapter 32. No. Okay. And you guys can all say a few words if you'd like, and I'll draw if you want.
Okay,
Yeah.
sure. So I'm Barbara Starley, founder of the Good Steward Church Academy, and it's a membership organization where I take accounting beyond debits and credits into how to really know that you're being a good steward of the money that God's entrusted to you. So the first person is Janice Tucker, and then I have one more. And the second person is Marilee Miller Clark from the Clark Law Firm.
She goes to my church. Okay.
Awesome. Luke Ziegemeyer with 5 Star Bank. We're a commercial business bank that does a lot of church lending and church banking, but we also, all of our church credit cards do not require a personal guarantee. So come to us for your banking and credit card needs.
That is awesome. I didn't know that. Okay.
Arlene Logan, $50 to Starbucks.
Is Arlene here? Oh, there she is. Okay. What? You can take them. If vendors want their boxes back, you can take them.
Hi, I'm Heidi Zinn, and I'm representing the Church Network. And just a quick shout out on the last page of your Monica Stern handbook, there's some information about us. We're local church business administrators that do what you do. We don't want to go it alone. So just get that information. There's a QR code for the local chapter. And then the last piece on the very last of the page is a group forum. You can sign up and say, hey, I need a pastor's charitable policy, or I have an HR question. And people like you will answer the questions. So highly encourage you to do it. And there is going to be a national conference here in Phoenix in July of 2027.
Yay. I'm also going to add, we are among celebrity here. Heidi was awarded a national award by the Church Network as a rising star. So I think we should all give her a big round of applause. Vicki Hegebush? Is Vicki here? There you go.
Well, hey everybody, my name is David Campbell, and I am with Brown & Brown Insurance. And we work with all sorts of religious nonprofits, schools, churches in Arizona and all throughout the country. So just want to say thank you to everybody who was able to stop by, say hi, and just have a conversation. And we're giving away $100 to Amazon, so that's pretty exciting. So.
Ooh. And the winner is
Dawn Kennedy.
Atonement Lutheran Church. Huh? Dawn here? Oh, there she is. Okay. Thank you. Yep. Cassie?
I'm Cassie Baker, Operations Director with Arizona Tuition Organization. If you would like to learn more about redirecting your tax dollars to help students in need, come see us. I have $50 to Amazon.
Okay. I don't think he won yet.
Jesse Best.
That's me. That's you? It wasn't rigged, really. Okay, Jessie Best.
What a great introduction. Hi, guys. My name is Jessie Best, and I'm the PR and events coordinator for Hope in the Future. We have a few of our staff members over there, too, so shout out to them. We are a nonprofit in the Valley that works with foster children. It's a really big need in Arizona, and we have many programs and initiatives such as our summer camps, our transitional living programs, and our Life 360 classes, which teaches our kiddos those basic skills your parents may not have been able to teach them. So thank you for stopping by our booth, and we have a fall goodie basket over there. So if we pull you, please meet me over there after. But yeah, it is Alicia Tovar. Yes, congratulations. Thank you so much.
Yeah, so they're one of the tax credit organizations. So this is where you donate and you get the tax credit back on your Arizona tax return.
Hi, I'm Tanya Miller, the sales manager at Ministry Works. I can hardly not say Ministry Works. We're now Brotherhood Works and offer even more than just payroll and HR solutions. And employee benefits is one of them. So I have Brent here. He's over at the Lightwell organization, which was so gracious to invite me with Monica. We're so glad to be here. Can't wait to work with more and more of you. We're going to be giving away a Bluetooth speaker right here, and then a Yeti tumbler.
Is that 2 draws then?
What do you?
1 draw.
It's up to you.
We
You're
can
the
do 2.
host. Yeah, let's do 2. Caleb Smith, you can get your pick because you're first. Tempting. Okay. All right, and now who's going to be next for the speaker? Helen Donovan. Oh, it's a lucky table. Here you go.
Very good.
There's a box for it at our table.
Hello. Okay. He might need that.
Good afternoon. My name is Jonathan Norton, and I'm with Lightwell Insurance Advisors of Arizona. And as most of you know, we do insurance for churches, property liability, auto, work comp, and employee benefits. We were going to give away a free coffee hangout with Bob Brown, but that didn't get approved. So our door prize instead is a camper mug, and inside, since it is fall, a $100 gift card to Sprouts.
Woohoo!
Is that? I just see Donna, maybe? Donna?
Borden?
Something like that?
Yeah, that was a tough one. There you go. Hi, stranger.
Hey, man. So the prize in here is the private cell phone number for Kevin Norton. Call him up. He'll spend an hour with you explaining your insurance policy. Or you can. The other thing that's in there is a gift card to Target for $100.
Woo!
And the winner is Mike Darris from Trinity Bible Church.
Woo! Yay, Mike!
You'll have a lot more fun with Kevin than you will in Target. Don't worry about it.
Okay, folks, we have reached the end, and I'm sorry we went a little over, but there didn't cover one module, so you can read through that one about taking cash at events because it's making my heart sore. And if you want a snack for the road, please help yourself. So anyway, thanks for coming. We hope to see you next year. Please fill out your evaluation forms because we can't help, we'll just do the same thing. And if you find something you want changed or a topic you want covered, please fill out the evaluation forms and leave them there.